Welcome to another human read audiobook by the United Marxist Pact Discord server, link below in the description. In this series, we continue our investigation into the initial construction, organizational structure, and the principles and tactics of the form of worker organization capable of seizing political power and establishing the revolutionary proletarian dictatorship and communality, which can in turn produce the communist mode of production through the shared class interests of the workers of the entire world. Our goal is to compile, analyze, and elaborate on what all these texts have to say about this, and at the end have a strong understanding of the exact scientific process of this, particularly in general terms. At the end of our readings as a whole, we will try to put it all together and present it as a coherent whole in an educational video with associated notations. Today's reading will be the 1926 Communist Party of Italy's Third Congress at Lyon, the theses presented by the left. We have a pre-written textual analysis of the terms of the aforementioned topics, which is also posted in the pinned comment if you prefer to read it in text, or follow the link in the description to a read-only version of my Google Docs notes. This will summarize the contents of the text, but is no replacement for the actual reading itself for the sake of understanding the context. In addition, in my reading, I supply my own commentary, critiques, additions, etc., which may be helpful for understanding some particularities. So, starting the analysis, in this text, in terms of the construction, structure, principles, and tactics of the Worker Association, it discusses the character of tactics, the party's relation to other organizations, and how leadership arises, and the basis for rejection of laborism of any sort of domination of the party by a fraction. It explains that the political class party, which aims to use revolutionary insurrection to build a new government and state organism via education of the revolutionary classes, to gain the will to take power and act as general staff of the revolution. This need for taking the role of general staff comes from necessarily myopic view of the workers about their own struggle, and need for all the individual struggles to be united together. Hence, the party must have political adherents of its members, who are willing to focus on the whole and on the final seizure of power, while also supporting the partial immediate interests of the working class. This party is not determined by a number of members or on its form, but rather if it is revolutionary in these terms. The party, in addition, is not a laborist one. There can be communists that are class traitors by the bourgeoisie, and proletarians that are class traitors towards the bourgeoisie. Ultimately, we cannot rely on organizational format as a decider on whether a party is revolutionary, as any format can have a slide into opportunism regardless of structure, should the tactics pursued fail to maintain principles. Tactics, in this sense, is defined as a way the party operates in response to specific situations, in relation to other groups, in relation to other organizations, and in relation to other institutions. Therefore, while these tactics are immediate, they are modified based on relation to overall principles, previous experience, and thereby establish continuous tactical norms in terms of classes of practical problems. Tactics involve compromise to take action, but they should be unwilling to give up everything. Through continual explication of the fundamental principles of the party, the demand that tactics retain organizational unity, efficiency, and defense against opportunism, the requirement that any engagement with the immediate struggles of the proletariat be accompanied with agitation for the uniting of all struggles while retaining party autonomy. Any amount of compromise should result in the improvement of subjective conditions, and thereby the proletariat's position to carry out the revolution when objective conditions are ripe and achieve victory. While there is an element of immediacy to all tactics, as particular situations cannot be anticipated, general situations can be. It is the duty of the party, acting as general staff of the revolution, to study the national and international objective conditions and formulate tactically sound plans for broad outlines according to hypothetical scenarios which emerge from reasonable interpretations of circumstances. A good tactic is dynamic enough so that the center can have it carried out without necessarily having to consult the party membership as a whole or the masses, but still not have unexpected or poor revolutions within the party of masses relations, excuse me, with the party or masses. These tactics must, to some degree, be universalized, but under unexpected conditions, they should not result in opportunism or eclecticism. Instead, they should stay in line with the party's general principles and therefore the party's tasks. They need to be constructed with the aim of maintaining the dynamism of the party's ideological, propaganda, and organizational functions, while allowing for and centering active participation of individual struggles initiated by the proletariat, until the crucial moment when the party must take on an essentially military character. The tactics must avoid being abstract, stopping concrete activity, being attached to action for action's sake, and or neglecting the link with principles and focusing on short term success. They must be constructed dialectically, and therefore they develop as the struggle does. Tactics are not set in place, unchanging no matter the conditions. Examples of such general yet historically and nationally specific tactics include 1. The United Front, which is risky and can lead to the belief that activist social pacifist struggle can defeat the bourgeoisie. This is the case because it is erroneous to believe that different factions of the bourgeoisie can be organized alongside, as all that is left are reactionary fascism and liberal democratic governance. Under the conditions of fascist government, the party must keep the proletariat from being fooled into thinking that a left wing bourgeois government is a solution. While individual workers in the Communist Party can join the United Front and within it, A. Agitate against anti classist positions, B. Criticize the social pacifist stances, and C. Recruit people from the United Front into the party. At no point can the party give up autonomy. 2. The struggle of national minorities, which can only be a tactic that has the potential to offer revolutionary possibilities, but also reactionary developments, and thereby cannot be termed a principle. The world struggle will be directed by organs of the revolutionary proletariat, which include all kinds of local, indigenous, economical, etc. formations. Such formations must be allowed to grow dynamically into their fullest extent, but nations wherein imperialism and patriotic ideology have become counter revolutionary. Such organizations disarm the proletariat and act as necessarily social chauvinistic and must be organized against. The party needs to be able to analyze such movements and tell the difference between them. 3. Organizational form does not decide whether something is communist or not. Organic solutions cannot be valid universally, as conditions matter. Artificial organizational structure fit in the incorrect environment will result in a paralysis of spontaneous initiatives and proletarian and classist energies. 4. Simple discipline and democratic decision-making processes, which cannot be used all the time, these only suppress factionalism, whereas we need to actually deal with it. Hence, organic centralism should instead be used, which ensures as much consultation with a base as possible while spontaneously eliminating any grouping that starts to differentiate itself, forcing everyone to be on board with the correct revolutionary politics. This requires open discussion of positions without recrimination. The party must be the full extent of volitional possibilities and initiative in all fields of activity, but it cannot be individual. No one person can hold the fullest volition, consciousness, and theoretical knowledge. This is only held by the collective. And so great man theory and voluntarist ideology, wherein an individual or small group of dedicated fighters enforce their political aims on the people via effort of will, activity, and heroism, does not work. Any belief that a few individuals will have the capacity to take necessary action and thereby make an elite outside of the party is necessarily fatalistic and pacifistic. It means the proletariat must wait for such individuals. This in turn leads to the vitality of the party disappearing and opportunism developing. In a party that rejects such notions, leaders in the party arise organically because they are instruments and operators of tasks of the party. the capacity to comprehend and explain facts along with lead and will action. Members should be able to carry out actions without being kept from leadership positions, such as abiding by the decisions of party organs and renouncing oppositional work too. Punishment for acting or explaining their political positions is self destructive, as it can only ever lead to internal factions and scheming, which can't be dealt with solely by mechanical organizational formulations. Such factionism can't be dealt with through, quote, the correct individuals, leaders, in, quote, the correct positions. It must be done through the way in which we organize. It should organize on a territorial basis and not give up organs subordinate to party discipline in the factories, seeking to form a trade union framework. Through such territorial outreach, it will have connection with the masses while keeping the main organization hidden. The party itself aims to show the necessity of class struggle which exceeds legal terms, as these are decided by the bourgeoisie, while also showing that the proletariat that the middle class lack the ability to produce a political general staff to lead the revolution, take power, or allow victories of the proletariat. They simply declare that their victory will allow easier organization for the proletariat. It seeks to instill confidence in the proletariat about carrying out revolution, which involves propaganda in terms of correct positions and successful operations. Is a fundamentally voluntary organization, aside from the crucial moment wherein it takes on a military character, unlike an army or state apparatus. Hence, there can be no material sanctions outside of leaving the party for refusal to carry out tasks. The center, therefore, needs to be able to predict how the party as a whole will react to orders, and what will result in greater position of the proletariat. This knowledge comes through experience, which allows the normalization of rules of engagement, produces leaders. Leaders arise through the carrying out of these tasks, which allow them to gain the trust of the party and masses, should they have victory and clearly, continuously carry out and embody their tasks. There should be no hierarchical bureaucracy, which is a sign of bourgeois influence as the power up top invokes unity while mobilizing initiatives on the ground. Such influences are defeatist in character and cannot be defeated in turn by discipline, can only be expelled through the party and proletariat being oriented against it, expelling them when they take on important political stances with anti-classist consequences. When the proletariat adopt non-revolutionary stances in response to objective conditions, the party maintains its principal line, which is necessary as the proletariat is always potentially a revolutionary class, and is the only revolutionary class. Therefore, the party must maintain coherency and rigor, educating and awaiting the development of revolutionary subjective conditions. Opportunism of all kinds must be rejected in all terms, as it confuses the proletariat and keeps them from achieving revolutionary consciousness. Ultimately, proletarian politics is aimed at higher forms of relation which link the revolutionary proletariat with its communist leadership in order to achieve revolutionary insurrection. Thus, for example, all regionalist, secessionist positions within agrarianism must be rejected, and every local committee and individual comrade should be in line with the center through clear and uniform operating procedures, parameters, activities, etc. The party, too, must have systematized and formulated organizational measures with uniform parameters, operating procedures, methods, and practices which are universally binding in the organization in order to avoid blind obedience, conflicting instructions stemming from lack of clarity of the organizational structure of the party. Despite that, such a requirement should not be maintained through enforcement via interventions by the central apparatus. Such solutions should only be done when absolutely necessary. Rather, local committees should have general autonomy except in emergencies. There should be inspectors which ensure direct political links between regions' leadership and the traditional rank and file organizations of the party, who intervene when they see that the local fundamental organization is no longer viable and help restore it. Once such proletarian groups have been fully established, worker committees can be produced which will engage in vigorous campaign, respond to changing situations in order to create a call to action, with a nucleus constituted of representatives from traditional mass organizations, aside from political delegates whom are rejected. These committees may have elections, but they are not organs of proletarian government. Rather, they are local and national alliances of the exploited for their joint defense. Welcome back to another reading session of the United Marxist Pact. We are continuing our investigation into the working organization which can bring about the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat and in turn develop the communist mode of production. We will be reading through the 1926 Communist Party of Italy's Third Congress, Lyon, theses presented by the left. In this text, we have general questions, principles of communism, nature of the party tactics and party action. Then international questions, the constitution of the Third International, world economic and political situation, the international's method of work, organizational questions, discipline and fractions, tactical questions up to the Fifth Congress, the question of, quote, new tactics, the union question, the agrarian question, the national question, Russian questions, and then finally, Italian questions. The Italian situation, political positions of the communist left, the work of the party's left leadership, relations between the Italian left and the Communist International, the Ordinovist tradition of the present leadership, the political work of the present party leadership, the party's trade union activity, party activity in agrarian and national matters, the leadership's organizational work, the leadership and question of fractionalism, and draft program of party work and on the party's internal situation. So this introduction is from 1970 right here. With a document like this, it is difficult to avoid a certain disproportion between the different parts, inasmuch as going on discussions have rendered certain points and certain arguments more topical, whilst others of equal importance have been cast in a minor light. In order to give as full an idea as possible on the thinking of the different groups of comrades responsible for the present theses, is worth providing references to some texts, which, although well known, are nowadays rather difficult to find. We believe it therefore useful to receive the present text with references to some documents relevant to the same line that is asserted and defended here. So we've actually read all these, I think. So the Rome Theses, voted on at the Second Congress of the Communist Party of Italy on March 26, 1922. The text presented at the Congress is published. We're not going to read that. Theses on Tactics of the Communist International, presented at the Fourth Congress of the Communist International. Program of Action of the Communist Party of Italy, presented at the Fourth Congress by the Communist International. Motion and theses approved at the National Consultative Conference of the Communist Party of Italy in May 1924, and the theses on the tactics of the Communist International, presented at the Fifth World Congress. So, starting up, Section 1, General Questions, Part 1, Principles of Communism. The key doctrines of the Communist Party are founded on Marxism, which the struggle against opportunist deviations reinstated and set in place as the cornerstones of the Third International. These consist of dialectical materialism as a method of conceiving the world and human history, the fundamental doctrines contained in Marx's Capital as a method of interpretation of present-day capitalist economy, the programmatic formulations of the Communist Manifesto as a historical and political plan of the emancipation of the world working class, the magnificent victorious experience of the Russian Revolution and the work of its leader Lenin, master of international communism, constitute the confirmation, the restoration, and consequent development of this system of principles and methods. It is not possible to be a communist or to militate in the ranks of the International if even one part of this is rejected. Consequently, the Communist Party rejects and condemns the doctrines of the dominant class, which range from spiritualistic and religious theories, idealist in philosophy and reactionary in politics, to those which are positivist and of a free-thinking Voltairean variety, and anti-clerical and democratic in the realms of politics. It likewise condemns certain political schools which have a following amongst the working class. Social democratic reformism, which cherishes peaceful transition without armed struggle, from capitalists to workers' power, invoking class collaboration. Syndicalism, which depreciates the political activity of the working class and the need for the party as supreme revolutionary organ. Anarchism, which denies the historical necessity of the state and of the proletarian dictatorship as a means whereby the social order is transformed and class division suppressed. The Communist Party likewise opposes the main manifestations of spurious revolutionism with aim to resuscitate such tendencies by mingling them with communist theses, a danger that is designated now by the well-known term centrism. That's a different centrism than the one we are familiar with. Part 2. Nature of the Party. The historical course of the proletariat's emancipation and the foundation of a new social order derives from the existence of class struggle. Every class struggle is a political struggle. That is to say, it has the tendency to end up as a struggle for the conquest of political power and control the new state organism. Consequently, the organ which leads the class struggle to its final victory is the class political party, which is the sole possible instrument firstly of revolutionary insurrection and then of government. From these simple but brilliant assertions of Marx, brought into maximum relief by Lenin, arises the definition of the party as an organization of all those who are conscious of the system of opinions, in which is summed up by the historical task of the revolutionary class, who have taken to decide to work for the victory of this class. Thanks to the party and the working class acquires a knowledge of the way forward and the will to take it. Historically, the party therefore represents a class in the successive stages of the struggle, if only a greater or smaller part of the class is regrouped in its ranks. This equates with how Lenin defined the party at the Second World Congress. Okay, we're going to take this and we're going to summarize it. Okay. So the party is an organ which leads the class struggle to its final victory. It uses revolutionary insurrection and builds a new government, a new state organism. The party educates the revolutionary class and acts as a general staff, helping the revolutionary class develop the will to take power and understand how to do it. So, at that. Back to the text. Marx and Lenin's conception of the party stands in sharp contrast to a typically opportunist conception of the laborist or workers' party, to whom all the individuals who are proletarian in terms of their social conditions are admitted by right. Within such a party, even if exhibiting an apparent numerical strength, there may, and indeed in certain conditions there will, prevail the direct counter-revolutionary influence of the dominant class, a class represented by a dictatorship of the organizers, and leaders whose individuals can derive just as well from the proletariat as from the other classes. This is why Marx and Lenin fought against this fatal theoretical error and never hesitated to break up false proletarian unity in practice in order to ensure, even during moments when social activity of the proletariat was eclipsed, and even by way of small political groups of adherents of the revolutionary program, that there would be continuity of the political function of the party in preparation for subsequent tasks of the proletariat. This is only possible way to achieve in the future the concentration of the greatest possible section of the workers around leadership under the banner of a communist party capable of fighting and winning. In other words, to put things shortly, this is a critique of essentially individual leaders within the Communist Party. Number one, taking a populist stance and just accepting everybody in who comes from a working class background. No, they need to have ideological development. No, they need to hold the correct political line through education. In addition, is also critiquing communist groups that find themselves with essentially the organizers of the party taking control over the working class rather than acting as their general staff. In this case, what is meant here is essentially the people should go to the Communist Party for arms and ammunition, for leadership, and so on and so forth, but carry out the revolution themselves. The Communist Party is acting as the organizer, as the voice which helps guide the proletariat but doesn't control them. I'm not putting it particularly well, but the party is not the dictatorship over the proletariat. The party is the dictatorship of the proletariat itself that that takes absolute control. Continue. An immediate organization of all workers on economic basis cannot take on political, that is revolutionary, tasks since the separate and localized professional groups feel impelled to satisfy only the partial demands that arise of direct consequence of capitalist exploitation. So, for example, the rural, actually in Europe, right now there are a number of farmer groups that are going around and wrecking shit. They're doing stuff like spraying feces fertilizer all over houses and stuff of of politicians that are fucking up their businesses, right? Now, this is, a good thing, but is it revolutionary? No. And part of the problem here is that this is only done in the interest of the farmers, the rural workers, insofar as farmers nowadays constitute, which many do, to be clear. But I don't know the full formation of European farmers. Continuing. Only with the direct intervention at the head of the working class of a political party, defined by the political adherence of its members, do we find a progressive synthesis of these particular impulses into a common vision and activity, whereby individuals and groups are enabled to go above and all to go beyond all particularism and accept difficulties and sacrifices for the final and general triumph of the working class cause. The definition of the party as a class party of the working class has a final and historical value for Marx and Lenin, not a particular statistical and constitutional one. So it doesn't matter how many people you have in your party or what your constitution or legal terms within your party platform are. Whether or not it is an actual proletarian party depends on its, you know, it being a political class party. That is to say, supporting the class interests of the proletariat, and aiming to seize class power by the working class. All right. So, due to the myopic view people have on their own struggle, the political class party must make that general and universal understanding. The party must have political adherence of its members, wherein the members are willing to focus on the whole and on the final seizure of power. It is not determined by the number of members, nor on the form of the party. I will say, as an aside, these are both important. You can't have a revolutionary communist party that is organized in the same format as, for example, the Democrat Party, right? That just doesn't work. The format, the structure of the party is, in fact, important. um, None of this works if you don't have the right format of the party. That's not to say that you can have, but at the same time, just because you have the correct format of party, the correct structure, doesn't make it revolutionary either. You need both. But rather, if it is revolutionary in the above terms. Continuing. Any conception of the problem of internal organization that leads to the error of the laborist conception of the party, that is, hey, if everybody is a labor in the party, then everything's hunky dory. reveals a serious theoretical deviation, inasmuch as it substitutes a democratic vision for a revolutionary one. It attributes more importance to utopian schemes for designing new organizations to the dialectical reality of the collision of forces between the two opposed classes. In other words, it represents the danger of relapsing into opportunism. As regards the perils of degeneration of the revolutionary movement, and to the means of guarantee the required continuity of the political line and its leaders and members, these dangers can't be eradicated with an organizational formula. Less so is it possible to eliminate them with the formula which states that only authentic workers can be communists. Position contradicted in our own experience by the vast majority of examples relating to both individuals and parties. The aforementioned guarantee must be sought elsewhere if we don't wish to contradict the fundamental Marxist postulate. The revolution isn't a question of forms of organization, a postulate in which are summed up by all the conquests achieved by scientific socialism with respect to the first rantings of utopianism. Our resolution to current problems regarding the internal organization of the international and the party set out from these conceptions on the nature of the class party. So, like I said, yeah, the revolution isn't a question of the forms of organization, but it's so important, and that's inarguable in my opinion. Right. The fact that we have recognized that the political class party, which is a form of organization, is necessary for the revolution to even occur, much less succeed, automatically means that the kind of organization that you have is of importance. But yes, the form of organization itself does not determine whether or not it is truly a proletarian, revolutionary organization. That comes from other aspects. All right, so we cannot rely on only having workers as members to determine if the party is communist, and there can be communists that are class traders from the bourgeoisie. And in addition, we cannot rely on organizational format as a decider on whether or not the party is revolutionary, as any format can result in a slide to opportunism, or can have a slide into opportunism, regardless of that structure. Our resolution to the current problems regarding the internal organization of the international party set out from these conceptions of the nature of the class party. Part 3. Party tactics and party action. The way the party operates in response to specific situations and relates other groups, organizations, and institutions of the society in which it moves constitutes its tactics. The general elements of this question must be defined in relation to our overall principles. It is then possible on a secondary level to establish concrete norms of action in relation to different types of practical problems in the successive phases of historical development. We're just going to put this in here. Yeah, we're going to put this in here, and I'm actually going to this, and then do this. And I'm not going to summarize that because it's just a definition of the tactics and then how those tactics can be put together under what conditions. So, I wish that would also include things like operations and strategy and the various other aspects of um, military doctrine, which is kind of what this is going for, right? It's talking about tactics a lot. So, yeah, you got your long term business goals or military goals. You got your business plan, that's your strategy. You got your strategic objectives. Then in your operational level, you have your line of business plans. Replace that with whatever you want. Then your operational objectives, and then finally at the tactical level, you've got your department or team actions. So, yeah, at a strategic level, an organization employs available resources to secure its final business goals and objectives. For example, business corporate plan. Operational level, an organization uses available resources to attain these strategic goals and objectives within a specific line of business. At the tactical level, departments and teams employ techniques or procedures to support operational objectives, as defined by the line of business. Of course, convert that over to military sounding or party action or whatever. But everything is tactics in this conception, and that's fine, but it doesn't sound very modern. That's all. In fact, it sounds straight out of the 1920s. Tenure. By assigning to the Revolutionary Party its place and its role in the genesis of a new society, the Marxist doctrine provides the most brilliant of resolutions to the question of freedom and determination in the activity of mankind. When extended to the abstract, quote, individual, however, the question will continue to furnish material for the metaphysical lubrications of the philosophers of the ruling and decadent class for years to come. Marxism, on the other hand, situates the problem in the correct light of a scientific and objective conception of history and society. The idea that the individual, and indeed one individual, can act on the outside world and shape it and mold it at will, as though through the power of initiative partook of some kind of divine inspiration, is a million miles from our view. We equally condemn the voluntarist conception of the party according to which a small group of men, after having forged for themselves a profession of faith, proceed to spread and impose it by a gigantic effort of will, activity, and heroism. It would, on the other hand, be a stupid and aberrant conception of Marxism to believe that the course of history and revolution proceed according to fixed laws, with nothing remaining for us to do apart from discovering what those laws might be through objective research and attempting to formulate predictions about the future whilst attempting nothing in the domain of action. The upshot of this fatalist conception is to annul the function of the party and indeed its very existence. Okay, we're going to write, actually, let's take this bit here. On the individual great fan theory bunk, and then voluntarist theology, wherein a small group of dedicated fighters enforces their will on their political aims on the people via effort of will, activity, heroism, not an answer. I don't know. The partisans would disagree with that. I think that it is a pretty good answer. The Cuban Revolution started with what? 23 men? 83? I don't remember. You know, I think that this idea that you gotta sit tight is a significant mistake. Though, to be clear, right here, it's like, oh yes, you do need to take action. Anyway, continuing. Marxist determinism doesn't attempt to find a solution halfway between these two solutions, but its powerful originality rises above them both. Because it is dialectical and historical, it rejects all a priorisms and doesn't claim to be able to apply, regardless of the historical epoch of the human grouping under consideration, one abstract solution to every problem. If the current development of the sciences does not allow for complete investigation on what induces the individual to act, starting with physical and biological facts to arrive at science of psychological activity, it is nevertheless possible to resolve the problem in the field of sociology by applying the problem like Marx, the methods of investigation appropriate to experimental and positive science. Fully, full, uh, I lost where I was. I'm just going to reread. It is nevertheless possible to resolve the problem in the field of sociology by applying to the problem, like Marx, the methods of investigation appropriate to experimental and positive science, fully inherited by socialism and which are quite different from the self-styled materialistic and positivist philosophy adopted during the historical advance of the bourgeois class. By taking rational account of the reciprocal influences between individuals through the critical study of economy and history, after having cleared the decks of every prejudice contained in the traditional ideologies, we can, in a certain sense, remove indeterminacy from the process of operating within each individual. With this as its point of departure, Marxism has been able to establish an ideological system that isn't an immutable and fixed gospel, but a living instrument that enables the laws of the historical process to be followed and recognized. By means of the economic determinism discovered by Marx, which forms the basis of this system, the study of economic forms and relationships and the development of the technical means of production provides us with an objective platform on which to make soundly based enunciations about the laws of social life and, to a certain degree, make predictions about subsequent development. With this duly recorded, we must emphasize that the final solution doesn't mean that we can say that having discovered the universal key, we may let economic phenomena follow their own imminent law, and predictable and established series of political facts will inevitably take place. I'm not actually going to put that in there, but I like this. I like this paragraph, so I'm going to save it. I'm putting in classroom chapter. Good quote. Okay, continuing. Undoubtedly, our critique is tantamount as completely and definitely devoiding of any means the aims and perspectives individuals had in historic events, even when such individuals are considered protagonists of historical deeds, although this does not completely apply to their actions. This, however, does not imply that a collective organism, such as the class party, could not and does not completely apply to their actions. This, however, does not imply that a wow. Should let me just reread this. This, however, does not imply that a collective organism, such as the class party, could not and should not express initiatives or have its own or have its own will. The solution we get to is countless times expressed in our fundamental texts. Humanity and most powerful groupings such as classes, parties, and states have moved almost as if they were playthings in the grip of economic laws, up to now almost entirely unknown to them. These groupings at the same time have lacked theoretical awareness of the economic process and the possibilities of managing and controlling it. However, the class that appears in the present historical epoch, the proletariat, and the political groupings which inevitably emanate from it, the party and the state. For them, the problem is modified. This is because the proletariat is the first class that isn't driven to base its rise of power on the consolidation of the social privileges and class divisions. The first not to subject its exploit another class anew, whilst at the same time it is the first that manages to shape a doctrine of the social and historical development of the economy. In other words, Marxist communism. For the first time, then, a class fights for the suppression of classes in general. and the suppression of private property and the means of production in general, rather than fighting for the mere transformation of the social forms of property. The proletariat's program, together with its emancipation from the present dominant and privileged classes, is the emancipation of the human collectivity from bondage to laws of economy, which once understood can be dominated within an economy which is finally rational and scientific, and which is subject to the direct intervention of man. This is what Engels meant when he wrote that the proletarian revolution marks a passage from the world of necessity to the world of freedom. I'm actually going to put this in the investigation into the communist mode of production. Okay, and then okay, continuing. This does not mean that we resuscitate the illusory myth of individualism, which wishes to liberate the human, quote, ego from external influences, especially since these influences tend to become ever more complex and the life of the individual ever more indistinguishable part of a collective life. On the contrary, parameters of the problem are changed, with will and freedom attributed to a class destined to become a unitary human grouping itself, a grouping which one day will struggle against the adverse forces of external physical world alone. Whilst only proletarian humanity, still in the future for us, will be free and capable of a will, isn't sentimental illusion but the capacity to organize and master the economy in the broadest sense of the word. And whilst it is true that the proletarian class today still has the extent of its activity determined by influences external to it, though less so than other classes, the organ in which, on the contrary, is summed up by the full extent of volitional possibilities and initiative in all fields of activity is a political party. Not just any old party, though, but the party of the proletarian class, the Communist Party, linked as though by an unbroken thread to the ultimate goals in the future. The party's power of volition, as well as its consciousness and theoretical knowledge, are functions that are exquisitively collective. Marxism explains that the leaders and the party itself are given their jobs because they are considered as instruments and operators who best manifest the capacity to comprehend and explain facts and to lead and at will by action, with such capacities nevertheless maintaining their origin in the existence and character of the collective organ. By way of these considerations, the Marxist conception of the party and its activity, as we have stated, thus shuns fatalism, which would have us remain passive spectators of phenomena into which no direct intervention is felt possible. Okay, we're going to take this. All right, so the party is a full extent of volitional possibilities and initiative in all fields of activity. Its power of volition, consciousness, and theoretical knowledge are necessarily collective. Individuals holding such does not allow for action. Leaders in the party are given their job because they are instruments and operators, and they are able to comprehend and explain facts and lead and will action. Fatalism and passivity are alien to the party. Uh, wow, we're really already 7 or 6 quotations in. Okay, continuing. Likewise, it rejects every voluntarist conception as regards of individuals, according to which the qualities of theoretical preparation, force of will, and the spirit of sacrifice, in short, a special type of moral figure and a prerequisite level of, quote, purity, set the required standards for every single party militant without exception, reducing the latter to an elite, distinct, and superior to the rest of the elements that compose the working class. The fatalist and pacifistic error, although it might not necessarily lead to the negating of the function and utility of the party, at the very least would certainly involve adapting the party to a proletarian class as understood merely in statistical and economic sense. We can sum up the conclusions touched on in the preceding theses as a condemnation of both the worker's conception and that of an elite, of an intellectual and moral character. Both of these tendencies are aberrations from Marxism, which end up converging on the slippery slope to opportunism. Okay. All right. So, belief that few individuals will have the capacity to take necessary action makes an elite that is outside the party. This is necessarily fatalistic and pacifistic, as it ultimately means that we should wait for such individuals. This leads to opportunism. Back to the text. In resolving the general question of tactics on the same terrain as that of the nature of party, the Marxist solution must be distinguished both from that doctrinal estrangement from the reality of the class struggle which contents itself with abstract lucubrations. Study, meditation. Okay, bro. Just fucking say it. Piece of writing, typically pedantic or over elaborate. Yeah, that's how I feel about this. Contents itself with abstract lucubrations, whilst negating concrete activity, and from sentimental asceticism, which aspires with the noisy gestures and heroic posturing of tidy minorities to bring about new situations in historical movements. Also, it must be distinguished from opportunism, which neglects the link with principles, i.e., the general scope of the movement, and keeping in view only an immediate and apparent success, is content to clamor for isolated and limited demands without bothering about whether these contradict the necessity for preparing for the supreme conquests of the working class. The mistake of anarchist politics derives both from the doctrinal sterility, its incapacity to comprehend the dialectical stages of real historical evolution, and from its voluntarist illusions, which cherish the fond hope of being able to speed up social process by the force of example, and of sacrifices made by the one or the many. The mistake of social democratic politics derives as much from a false conception of Marxism in holding that the revolution will mature slowly of its own accord, without a revolutionary insurrection willed by the proletariat, as it does from a voluntarist pragmatism, which, unable to relinquish the immediate results of its day-to-day activities and initiatives and interventions, is happy to struggle for objectives which are only superficial interest to proletarian groups. For once obtained, these objectives merely become parts of the game of conserving the dominant class, rather than serving its preparation for the victory of the proletariat. Such objectives are partial reforms, concessions, and advantages, both political and economic, obtained from the bosses and bourgeois state. Take this here. And then we're going to also take no, never mind. Just says just that. Alright, so Marxist tactics avoid being abstract, stopping concrete activity, being attached to action for action's sake, and neglecting to link with principles and focusing on short-term success, aka opportunism. Back to the text. The artificial introduction into the class movement of the theoretical dictates of, quote, modern, voluntarist and pragmatist philosophy, Bergson, Gentile, and Croce, based on idealism, can only but prepare the opportunist affirmation of new ways of reformism. It cannot be passed off as a reaction to reformism just because it demonstrates a superficial liking for bourgeois positivism. The party cannot and must not restrict its activity either to conserving the purity of theoretical principles and of the organizational collective, or to achieving immediate successes and numerical popularity regardless of the cost. At all times and in all situations, this activity must incorporate the three following points. A. defense and clarification of the fundamental programmatic postulates in the light of new facts as they arise. That is to say, the theoretical consciousness of the working class. B. Assurance of the continuity of the party's organizational unity and efficiency and its defense against contamination by extraneous influences that are opposed to revolutionary interests of the proletariat. C. Active participation in all the struggles of the working class, including those arising from partial and limited interests, in order to encourage their development, but constantly highlighting their connection with the final revolutionary objectives, and presenting the conquest of the class struggle as a bridge, a passage to the indispensable struggles to come, by denouncing the danger of settling for partial achievement as if they were ends in of themselves, to be bartered in exchange for the conditions of proletarian class activity and combativity, such as the autonomy and independence of its ideology and of its own organizations, the party being the first and foremost among these. The supreme purpose of this complex party activity is the creation of the subjective conditions for the proletariat's readiness, so that it is in position to profit from these revolutionary possibilities as soon as history presents them, and so it emerges from the struggle victor rather than vanquished. Okay. This is a good section. I don't even know if I can reduce this, if I can summarize this. I think it's pretty well summarized. That's me at any rate. Anyway, continuing. All this is a point of departure for responding to questions of the relations between the party and the proletarian masses, the party and other political parties, and the proletariat and other social classes. We must consider the following tactical formulation wrong. All true communist parties should in all situations strive to be mass parties, that is to say, always be organizations with huge memberships and a very widespread influence over the proletariat, such as to least exceed that of other self-styled workers' parties. Such a proposal is a caricature of Lenin's practical, relevant, and eminently appropriate watchword of 1921, namely, in order to conquer power, it isn't sufficient to form, quote, genuine communist parties and launch them into the insurrectionary offensive, because what is needed are numerically powerful parties with a predominating influence over proletariat. In other words, before the conquest of power and in the period leading up to it, the party must have the masses with it, must first of all conquer the masses. Such a formulation only becomes rather dangerous when used in conjunction with the notion of the majority of the masses, since it lends itself amongst the chapter and verse Leninists, now and in the past, to the danger of a social democratic interpretation of theory and tactics. For although expressing the perfectly correct idea that the dangerous practice of engaging in reckless action with insufficient forces, or when the moment isn't ripe, must be avoided, the unspecificness about how the majority is to be measured, that is, whether in the parties, the unions, or other organs, gives rise to opposite danger being diverted from action, when it is both possible and appropriate, that is, at times when truly, quote, Leninist resolution and initiative is required. The formula, which states that the party must have the masses with it on the eve of the struggle, has now become a typically opportunist formula in the facile interpretation of today's pseudo-Leninists, when they assert that the party must, in quote, all situations, be a mass party. There are objective situations when the balance of forces are unfavorable to revolution, although perhaps closer to a revolution in time than others. Marxism teaches us that historical evolution takes place at very different rates. In these situations, that is to say, some days are 10 years, others are 10 years. Some years are days, some days are years, you know. In these situations, the wish to be a majority party of the masses and enjoy an overriding political influence at all costs can only at such times be achieved by renouncing communist principles and methods and engaging in social democratic and pay bourgeois politics instead. It must clearly stated that in certain situations, past, present, future, the majority of the proletariat has adopted, does, and inevitably will adopt a non-revolutionary stance, either through inertia or collaboration with the enemy as the case may be. Nevertheless, despite everything, the proletariat everywhere and always remain the potentially revolutionary class entrusted with revolutionary counterattack, but only insofar as within it there exists a Communist Party, and where, without ever renouncing coherent interventions when appropriate, this party knows how to avoid taking paths, which, although apparently easiest way to instant popularity, would divert it from its tasks and thereby remove the essential point of support for ensuring the proletariat's recovery. On dialectical and Marxist grounds such as these, and never on aesthetic and sentimental grounds, we reject the bestial expression of opportunism, which maintains that the Communist Party is free to adopt all means and all methods. It is said by some that precisely because the party is truly communist, sound in principles and organization, it can indulge in the most acrobatic of political maneuverings. But what this assertion forgets is that the party itself is both both factor and product of historical development. An even more malleable proletariat is yet more so. The proletariat will not be influenced by the contoured justification for such, quote, maneuvers offered by party leaders, but by actual results. The party must know how to anticipate these results, mainly by using the experience of past mistakes. It is not just by theoretical credos and organizational sanctions that the party will be guaranteed against degeneration, but by acting correctly in the field of tactics, and by making a determined effort to block off false paths with precise and respected rules of action. Okay. I'll take this. All right. So at times the proletariat will adopt non-revolutionary stances. However, the party must maintain its principled line. This is because the proletariat is always potentially a revolutionary class, is the only revolutionary class. Therefore, the party must maintain coherency and rigor for when the proletariat does regain its revolutionary consciousness. Opportunism must be rejected in all terms, as this confuses the proletariat. This confuses the proletariat and keeps them from achieving revolutionary consciousness. Educating and awaiting the development of revolutionary subjective conditions. Okay. Within the tactical sphere, within the tactical sphere, there's another error which clearly leads back to the classical opportunist positions dismantled by Marx and Lenin. This consists in asserting that in the case of struggles between classes and political organizations which take place outside the party-specific terrain, the party must choose a side which represents the development of the situation most favorable to general historical evolution, and should more or less openly support and coalesce with it. The pretext for this is that the conditions for a complete proletarian revolution, to be set in motion by the party when the time comes, will have arrived solely when there has been a sufficient maturation and evolution of political and social forms. For a start, the very presuppositions that lie behind such politics are at fault. The typical scheme of a social and political evolution, fixed down to the smallest detail as allegedly providing the best preparation for final advent of communism, belongs to the opportunist brand of, quote, Marxism, and is basis on which the various Kautsky's set about defaming the Russian Revolution and the present communist movement. It isn't even possible to establish in a general way the most propitious conditions for Communist Party work to bear fruit when are to be found under certain types of bourgeois regime. For example, the most democratic. For whilst it is true that the reactionary and, quote, right wing measures of bourgeois government have often obstructed the proletariat is no less true, and in fact occurs far more often, that the liberal and left-wing politics of bourgeois governments have also stifled the class struggle and diverted the working class from taking decisive action. A more accurate evaluation, truly conforming with Marxism's breaking of the democratic, evolutionist, and progressive spell, maintains that the bourgeoisie attempts, and often succeeds, in alternating its methods and parties in government according to its counter-revolutionary interests. All our experience shows that whenever the proletariat gets enthusiastic about the vicissitudes of bourgeois politics, opportunism triumphs. In other words, don't get too hopped up on, oh, Donald Trump did this, Biden did this. No. Focus on what you need to be fucking doing. Right? It's not as if, I could go in there and get Biden to do something else. Push him left. Nonsense. No, it doesn't work. We all know this. Why do people keep falling for it? The only way for, this to actually work is if we take direct action. That's the only way you're going to push them in any direction, by forcing them to. And that should be obvious to anybody who understands bourgeois politics. Even liberals should understand this, but apparently they don't. Right? This is basic stuff about liberal politics. It just reminds me so much of how I think I talked about before. Biden goes in, he's like, I want my 3.2 trillion or whatever infrastructure plan. And it's like, you have just presented the exact amount you need, the minimum amount you need to get this thing through, right? If you are bartering, which the whole concept of the liberal state in this sense is, oh, you're trying to compromise, you're trying to come to a compromise with ideological opponents within the democratic sphere. If you're trying to do that, then obviously you should start high and be compromised and bartered down to where you were really expecting to get. Like this is basic shit. Even a 3-year-old should understand this. Trading cards on the on the on the field. But apparently, the Democrats have been doing the song dance, and no, they are doing the song dance. They have shared interests, shared goals. That they want the exact same things that the Republicans do, just in different ways. Anyway, continue. Secondly, even if it are true that certain changes of government within the present regime made the further development of proletarian action easier, there is clear evidence that this would depend on one express condition: the existence of a party which had issued timely warnings to the masses about the disappointment which would inevitably follow what had appeared to be an immediate success. Indeed, not just the existence of the party, but its capacity to take action, even before the struggle to which we refer, in a manner which is clearly perceived as autonomous by proletarians, who follow the party not on the basis of schemes which might be convenient to adopt at an official level, but because of the party's down-to-earth attitude when faced with struggles unable to culminate in the definitive proletarian victory. The party doesn't turn itself into a meager manager of transitional demands and accomplishments which are not of direct interest to the class it represents, and neither does it barter away its specific character and autonomous activity in order to become some kind of insurance society for all the political, quote, renewal movements or political systems and governments under threat from allegedly, quote, worse government. The requirements of this live action are often falsified by invoking both Marx's formulation that, quote, communists support any movement directed against existing social conditions, end quote, and the whole of Lenin's doctrine directed against, quote, the infantile disorder of communism, end quote. The speculations attempted on these declarations of Marx and Lenin within our movement are substantially similar to analogous speculations continually indulged in by the revisionists and centrists of the Bernstein and Nenni stamp, who in the name of Marx and Lenin have mocked revolutionary Marxism. We must make two observations. First of all, Marx and Lenin's positions have a contingent historical value since they refer to Marx's case to a pre-bourgeois Germany and Lenin's case as illustrating left-wing communism and infantile disorder to the Bolshevik experience in Tsarist Russia. We shouldn't base our resolution of tactical questions under classical conditions. For example, the proletarian conflict with a fully developed capitalist bourgeoisie on these foundations alone. Secondly, the sport to which Marx refers and Lenin's, quote, compromises. Lenin's a great Marxist dialectician and champion of real, non-foil intransigence, aimed and directed at an immutable goal, like to, quote, flirt with such terms. Our support and compromises with movements still force to clear the way forward with their insurrection against past social formations, even if this does contradict their ideology and long-term aims of their leaders. In other words, other groups might find themselves being opportunistic, and Lenin is saying take advantage of that. The intervention of the Communist Party therefore occurs as an intervention in the setting of a civil war, and this explains Lenin's positions on the peasant and national question during the Kornilov affair and 100 other cases. These two key observations aside, neither Lenin's criticism of infantilism nor any Marxist text on the suppleness of revolutionary politics was ever meant to undermine the barrier deliberately erected against opportunism, defined by Engels and later by Lenin as, quote, absence of principles, or obliviousness of the final goal. To construct communist tactics with a formalist rather than a dialectical method would be a repudiation of Marx and Lenin. It would, therefore, be a major error to assert that the means should correspond to the ends not by way of their historical and dialectical succession in the process of development, but depending on similarities and analogous aspect, that means and ends may assume in a certain immediate sense, in which we might call ethical, psychological, and aesthetic. We don't need to make in the realm of tactics the mistakes made by anarchists and reformists in the realm of principle, for whom it seems absurd that the suppression of both classes in state power is repaired by the domination of the proletarian class and its dictatorship, and the abolition of all social violence is realized by employing both offensive and defensive revolutionary violence. Revolutionary to overthrow the existing power and conservative to maintain the proletarian power. It would be equally mistaken to make the following assertions: that a revolutionary party must struggle at all times without taking into account the strength of friends and foes. In the case of a strike, for example, the communists must always insist it to be continued to the bitter end, that the communists must shun certain means of dissimulation, trickery, espionage, etc., because they aren't particularly noble or pleasant. Marxism and Lenin's critique of the superficial pseudo-revolutionism that fouls the path of the proletariat consists of attempts to eliminate these stupid and sentimental criteria as a way of resolving the problem of tactics. This critique is definitively acquired part of the communist movement's experience. One tactical error that this critique allows us to avoid is the following: that since communists aim for a political split with the opportunists, we should therefore support splitting off from trade unions led by supporters of the Yellow Amsterdam Union. It is merely polemical trickery that has misrepresented the Italian left as basing its conclusions on notions like, quote, it is undignified to meet the opportunist leaders in person, end quote, and so on. Let's take this right here. I'm not going to summarize this for the time being. But this critique of infantilism, quote unquote, doesn't, however, mean that indeterminacy, chaos, and arbitrariness must govern tactics, or that, quote, all means are appropriate to achieve our aims. To say that the guarantee of the coordination of the means of the ends resides in the revolutionary nature acquired by the party and in the contributions that eminent men or groups, backed up by a brilliant tradition, will bring to its decision making is just a non Marxist play on words, because it doesn't take into account the repercussions that the means of actions themselves have on the party within the dialectical play of cause and effect. The fact that we ascribe no value whatsoever to the quote intentions which dictate individuals or group initiatives, let alone our quote suspiciousness, without meaning to give offense about such intentions, which the bloody experience of the past means we can never set aside entirely. In his pamphlet on infantilism, Lyon wrote that the tactical means must be chosen in advance in order to fulfill the final revolutionary objective and be governed by a clear historical vision of the proletarian struggle and its final goal. He showed it would be absurd to reject some tactical expedient just because it appeared, quote, unpleasant, or was deserving of the final, quote, of the definition, quote, compromise. What was necessary instead was to decide whether or not it was a means of corresponding to the final goal. The collective activity of the party and the Communist International poses and will continue to pose this formidable task. If in matters of theoretical principle we can say that Marx and Lenin have bequeathed such a sound heritage, although that is not to say that there are no new tasks of theoretical research for communism to accomplish. The same cannot be said as regards the tactical matters, not even as after the Russian Revolution and the experience of the first years of the life of the new international, which is the pride of Lenin all too soon. The question of tactics is much too complex to be resolved by the simplistic and sentimental answer of the, quote, infantiles. It requires an in-depth contribution from the whole to the international communist movement in light of its experiences, old and new. Marx and Lenin aren't being contradicted if we say in order to resolve this question, rules of conduct must be followed which, while it's not as vital and fundamental as principles, are nevertheless binding both on party members and the leading organs of the movement, who should forecast the different ways in which situations may develop so as to plan with the greatest possible degree of accuracy how the party should act when one of these hypothetical scenarios assumes specific dimensions. Situations must be studied and understood before tactical decisions can be taken, because this signals to a movement that the time has come for an action which has already been anticipated to the greatest extent possible. They should not lead at the arbitrary decision of leaders to, quote, improvisations and, quote, surprises. To deny the possibility of predicting tactics in their broad outlines, not predicting situations, which is possible with even less certainty, but predicting of what we should do in the various hypothetical scenarios based on the progression of objective situations, is to deny the party's task, to reject the sole guarantee we can give that the party members and the masses will respond in any eventuality to the orders of the center. This is a good bit right here. In this sense, a party is not an army, nor even a state apparatus, that is to say, an organ in which hierarchical authority prevails and voluntary adhesion accounts for nothing. It is obvious that for the party member there always remains an option of not executing the orders, which doesn't involve material sanctions, leaving the party. A good tactic is one which, should the situations change in the center not have time to consult the party and still less the masses, does not lead to an unexpected repercussions within the party itself and within the proletariat, which could pull the opposite direction to the success of the revolutionary campaign. The art of predicting how the party will react to orders, and which orders will obtain a good response, is the art of revolutionary tactics. This can only be entrusted to a collective use of the experience gained from past action, summarized in clear rules of action, by entrusting to leaders the fulfillment of these tasks. Militants ensure that these leaders will not betray their mandate, and they undertake substantially, and not just apparently, to carry out the orders of the movement productively and decisively. Given that the party is perfectible and not perfect, we do not hesitate to say that much has to be sacrificed to clarity and to the power of persuasion of the tactical guidelines, even if this involves a certain schematization. Should our tactical schemes break down under the weight of circumstances, we will not remedy this by falling back into opportunism and eclecticism. Rather, we will have to make renewed efforts to bring tactics back into line with the party's task. It is not just the good party that makes good tactics, but good tactics that make the good party. Good tactics can only be those who can be only be understood by and chosen by everyone in their fundamentals. Basically, what we oppose is the party's collective work of defining its tactical guidelines should be stifled by demands for unconditional obedience to one man, one committee, or one particular party of the international and its traditional ruling apparatus. The party's activity takes on a strategic aspect at crucial moments in the struggle for power, at which point it assumes an essentially military character. In the preceding situation, the party's action is not restricted, however, to its purely ideological, propagandistic, and organizational functions, but consists, as we already stated, of active participation in the individual struggles initiated by the proletariat. This being so, the system of technical guidelines must therefore be constructed with the precise aim of establishing under what conditions the intervention of the party and its activity within such movements, its agitation at the heart of proletarian struggle, connects with the ultimate and revolutionary objective while simultaneously guaranteeing the advantageous progress of ideological, organizational, and tactical preparation. In the next part, we will take particular problems and examine how our elaboration of the particular norms of communist activity relates to the present stage of development of the revolutionary movement. International questions. Part 1. The Constitution of the Third International. The crisis in the Second International caused by the World War has, with the Constitution of the Communist International, been completely and definitively resolved as far as the restoration of revolutionary doctrine is concerned. Whereas, from the organizational and tactical point of view, despite the formation of the Comintern clearly constituting an immense historical victory, the crisis in the proletarian movement has not been resolved to the same extent. A fundamental factor in the formation of the new international was the Russian Revolution, first glorious victory of the world proletariat. However, owing to the social conditions in Russia, the Russian Revolution hasn't provided the general historical model for revolutions in other countries on the tactical side. In it, the transition from feudal autocratic power to the proletarian dictatorship, there is no epoch of political domination by the bourgeois class, organized in its own exclusive and stable state apparatus. It is precisely for this reason that the historical confirmation of the concepts of the Marxist program in the Russian Revolution has been of such enormous significance, and of such great use in routing social democratic revisionism in the realm of principles. In the organizational field, however, there has the struggle against the Second International, an integral part of the struggle against global capitalism, hasn't met with the same decisive success, and a multitude of errors has been committed which have resulted in the Communist parties not being as effective as objective conditions have allowed. The same has to be said as regards the fields of tactics, where many problems have not been resolved and still haven't been properly resolved today. In the sector where bourgeois, modern bourgeois parliamentary state with historically stable apparatus, proletariat, and the communist parties have not always derived all that they could have from the proletarian offensive against capitalism, from the liquidation of the social democratic parties, for example, the political organs of the counter-revolutionary bourgeoisie. Part 2. World economic and political situation. The international situation today appears less favorable to the proletariat than in the immediate post-war years. From the economic point of view, we witness a partial restabilization of capitalism. However, we understand this stabilization only to mean that only certain parts of the economic structure have been contained, and not that a state of affairs has arisen which excludes the possibility, even in the immediate future, of new disturbances. There is still a market capitalist crisis, and its definitive worsening is inevitable. In the political sphere, we witness a weakening of the revolutionary movement in almost every advanced country, counterbalanced, happily, by the consolidation of Soviet Russia and by the struggles of the colonial peoples against the capitalist powers. Such a situation presents a double danger, however. In the first place, by pursuing the erroneous method of situationism, A certain tendency towards Menshevism arises in the way the problems of the proletariat action are evaluated. Secondly, if the pressure from genuine classist action diminishes, the conditions which Lenin saw as necessary for a correct application of tactics in the national and peasant question risk being misapplied within the overall politics of the Comintern. The post-war proletarian offensive was followed by employers' offensive against proletarian positions, to which the Comintern replied that the watchword of the United Front. There then arose a problem of the rise in various countries of democratic pacifist situations, which Comrade Trotsky correctly denounced as representing a danger of degeneration for our movement. We must avoid all interpretations of situations which present as a vital question for the proletariat, the struggle between two parts of the bourgeoisie, the left and the right, and too strict identification of these with socially distinct groups. The correct interpretation is that the dominant class possesses several governmental methods that are in essence reduced to two: the reactionary fascist method and the liberal democratic method. So we're going to take this here and we're going to do a quick summary. So the United Front is risky as it can lead to belief that activist social pacifistic struggle can defeat the bourgeoisie. You cannot engage in any form of tactics which lead to the belief that the different factions of the bourgeoisie can be organized alongside. And at this point, the only true factions in the bourgeoisie are reactionary fascism and liberal democratic governance. And as we all know, these things feed into one another, and in fact, they overlap significantly, to put things lightly. Continuing. Setting out for an analysis of economy, Lenin's theses have already reliably proved that the most modern strata of the bourgeoisie tend to unify not only the productive mechanism, but also their political defenses into the most decisive forms. It is therefore false to state that, as a general rule, the road to communism must pass through a stage of left-wing bourgeois government. If nevertheless such a case arose, the condition for proletarian victory would reside in a party tactic of marshalling against the illusions generated by the accession of such a left-wing government and continuous opposition, even during periods of reaction to political democratic formations. All right. So, in conditions of fascist governments, the proletariat can actually struggle for communism. It does not require a liberal bourgeois one. In the circumstances of struggle against a fascist governance, the party must keep the proletariat from being fooled by liberal order to thinking that a left-wing bourgeois government is something to support. So an example of this would be, for example, the people who are like, oh, we have to defeat Biden, defeat Trump and put Biden in place, and then we'll push Biden left, and we can't actually properly organize while there's a fascist in power. And it's like, no, you can organize, and also you've completely failed on any level to do any of this so-called pushing, which everybody told you so. And in addition to that, has organizing somehow improved? No. In truth, like with Black Lives Matter, after Biden came to presidency, all that happened is that the media stopped. They kept protesting, but then the media stopped covering them, and Biden increased the amount of repression, and they were crushed. It's pretty much silently. So yeah. Back to the text. Part 3. The Internationalist Method of Work. One of the Communist International's most important tasks has been dispelling the proletariat's mistrust of political action, which arose as a result of the parliamentary degeneracies of opportunism. Marxism doesn't interpret politics as the art of using cunning techniques in parliamentary and diplomatic intrigues to be used by all parties in pursuit of their special ends. Proletarian politics rejects the bourgeois methods of politics and anticipates higher forms of relations, culminating in the art of revolutionary insurrection. This rejection, which we will not present in greater theoretical detail here, is the vital condition both of effective linking up of the revolutionary proletariat with its communist leadership, and for ensuring effective selection of personnel for the latter. The working methods of the International fly in the face of this revolutionary necessity. In the relations between the different organs of the communist movement, a two-faced politics frequently gains the upper hand, and a subordination of theoretical rationale to fortuitous motives, and a system of treaties and pacts between persons, which fails to faithfully convey the relations between the parties and the masses, has led to bitter disappointments. Improvisation, surprises, and theatrical scene changes are factors that are entering all too easily into the major and fundamental decisions of the International, disorientating both comrades and the proletariat alike. For example, the majority of internal party questions are resolved in international organs and congresses by a series of unwieldy arrangements which make them acceptable to the various leadership groups, but add nothing useful to the real process of party growth. So we're going to take this. So proletarian politics is aiming at higher forms of relations which link the revolutionary proletariat with its communist leadership to achieve revolutionary insurrection. To that end, rather than using traditional bourgeois politicking, it seeks to find the best people for that goal. And what that means is, if your internal party structure is doing this sort of, internal cunning techniques and diplomatic intrigues and so on and so forth, then you're doing it wrong. Now, to be fair, like Lenin did this shit a lot. He had people regularly expelled from the party through intense periods of political intrigue. For example, his struggle against the economists and so on, like Alexander Bogdanov, the Machists, those people. These were political aims. Now, it was, of course, within the framework of, hey, their theory is wrong and therefore their praxis is wrong, and then agitate within the party to get them removed from position on those grounds. But at the same time, that's its own form, right, of cunning stuff. Lenin came to the conclusion that his methods were right and that others were wrong, and he hatched a plot and he carried it through. And that ended up being a good thing. Right? Continuing. And I mean that right, as in, yes, it was a good thing. Bogdanov and the economists and whatnot were far behind the masses in their own terms, and they wanted to keep things secretive. They wanted to keep the party. Lenin was accused of blankism that had nothing on what was going on before. Okay, continue. Part 4, Organizational Questions. During the founding of the Comintern, the view that it was necessary to establish a vast concentration of revolutionary forces carried a lot of weight because it was predicted at the time that objective conditions would develop much more rapidly than they did. Nevertheless, in retrospect, we can see that it would have been preferable to establish organizational criteria which were more rigorous. The formation of parties and the conquest of the masses has been favored neither by making concessions to anarchist and syndicalist groups, nor by the compromises made with the centrists allowed for in the 21 conditions, neither by the organic fusions with parties or fractions of parties as a result of political, quote, infiltration, nor by tolerating in some countries a dual communist organization alongside sympathizer parties. The watchword of organizing the party on the basis of factory cells, launched after the Fifth Congress, hasn't achieved its aim of remedying the glaring defects concordantly observed in the various sections of the International. Once applied as a general rule, especially in the way the Italian leadership has interpreted it, this watchword lends itself to serious errors and to deviations both from the Marxist postulate that revolution isn't a question of forms of organization and from the Leninist thesis that an organic solution can never be valid for all times and all places. Let's take this. we're not going to summarize it just yet. I'll read a little further down. For parties operating in bourgeois countries with a stable parliamentary regime, organization on a factory cell basis is less suitable than territorial units. It is also a theoretical error to assert that whilst parties organized on a territorial basis are social democratic parties, those based on cells are genuine communist parties. In practice, the cell type of organization makes it even more difficult to carry out the party's task of unification amongst the proletarians and trade and industry groups. A task that is all the more important and the more unfavorable the situation is, and the more the possibilities of proletarian organization are reduced. Various drawbacks of a practical nature are connected with proposals to organize the party on the exclusive basis of factory cells. In Tsarist Russia, the issue appeared in a different context. Relations between the owners of industry and the state were different, and the obligation of posing the central question of power rendered the corporatist danger less acute. It's been a while since I read What Is to Be Done. It's on this reading list, but we skipped over it due to length. But if I remember correctly, the cells that are being discussed here are the cells of essentially highly professional and trained revolutionary operatives who would go around passing out illicit propaganda and stuff and whatnot. Because in Tsarist Russia, everything had to be super secretive. You would get tortured and executed, or just executed, hopefully. Good luck with that, by the secret police and whatnot, if you didn't. So everybody had to be acting in very deep secrecy. Now they're saying, okay, well, because things are quite different here, which is something that which the Dutch German stance also stated, this sort of organizing isn't effective. Rather, we need a mass-based organization. We can't have these secretive cells. To we need to unify proletarians in various trades and industry groups. So let's see. No, we'll keep reading. The factory cell system does not increase the workers' influence in the party, since the key links in the network all consist of the non-worker and ex-worker elements, which constitute the official party apparatus. So claiming it creates a bureaucracy. Given the faulty working methods of the International, the watchword Bolshevization, from the organizational point of view, manifests as a pedestrian and inadequate application of the Russian experience, which has in many countries already prompted a paralysis, albeit unintentional, of spontaneous initiatives and proletarian and classist energies by means of an apparatus whose selection functions are for the most part artificial. Keeping the organization of the party on a territorial basis doesn't mean having to relinquish party organs in the factories. Indeed, there must be communist groups there, linked with the masses and subject to party discipline, in order to form its trade union framework. This method establishes a much better connection with the masses and keeps the party's main organization less visible. So we're going to take this and this last bit here. So the form of organization does not make something communist or not. Organic solutions cannot be valued universally. Conditions matter. Okay. And then we're going to move to this next bit. Well, actually, no, I wanted to talk about this for a second. Right. I've been having that long discussion about, okay, is it possible for us to go in and say universal things about organization? Say, organizations have universal properties. Obviously, that is the case. Like, all organizations are going to have a way to look externally. The method of doing that might be different across different organizations, but all organizations need a way to look externally. All organizations need a way to look internally. This is a universal thing. If an organization lack something like that, then it will putter along for a little bit and then just disappear. You have to have some way to actually do. You need a meta language. You need some way to look at yourself and think about things. In addition, we're also presupposing the party organization. And a party is, in fact, an organization. It's a particular form of organization. And a class political party is a particular form of organization that we are already presupposing is necessary. Unless we want to just do away with that, we can make determinations on what the character of a communist party or a communist organization looks like, at least in general terms. And then we can get more specific over time. Now, it is absolutely the case that simply because a communist organization has written down, we are a communist organization, we are a communist party, and this is our structure, that doesn't necessarily mean it is, because the various people might in it, they might be opportunists. It might not be carrying out its tasks within the organizational format, so it doesn't even matter. Or they might be just completely liberal in character. All sorts of things can be the case, and it's absolutely true that you cannot just say, okay, this has democratic centralism, check. This has councils within it, check. This has workers doing action, check. No, you have to look at, okay, how is that democratic centralism carried out? How are those worker councils organized? Who's part of them? Are these yellow unions? What's going on here? What kind of actions are these workers carrying out? All these are, of course, of key importance. And all these, of course, determine whether or not that Communist Party is actually carrying out communist tasks. However, that doesn't mean that we can't say things about organization. The other thing here is this interesting bit. An organic solution can never be valid for all times and all places. So I would love for them to go into more detail about what this organic solution is. Because my understanding is that organic action is more or less individuals taking spontaneous action, and well, no, that's unfair. We'll see if they go into any more detail. Yeah. Anyway, let's go to the next bit. So, poor organizational structure to fit conditions will lead to paralysis of spontaneous initiatives and paralysis of proletarian and classist energies. It's because it creates artificial organizational functions which do not match their conditions. Completely agree. Okay. All right. So, in case of Western Europe, even under Mussolini, it seems the party should organize on a territorial basis. It should not give up party organs in the factories. These organs should be subordinate to party discipline and form a trade union framework. By organizing territorially with outreach in this matter, this will allow connection to the masses while keeping the main organization hidden. Back to text. Part 5. Discipline infractions. Another aspect of the watchword Bolshevization is entrusting the guarantee of the party's effectiveness to centralized discipline and strict prohibition of fractionalism. The Vile Court of Appeal for all controversial questions is the international central organ, with hegemony being attributed, if not hierarchically, at least politically, to the Russian Communist Party. Such a guarantee doesn't actually exist, and the whole approach to the problem is inadequate. The fact of the matter is that the spread of fractionalism within the international hasn't been avoided, but has been encouraged instead to assume mass and hypocritical forms. Basically, everybody's going in and saying on paper that they agree, but they actually don't. Now, is this a problem? Kind of, but at the same time, kind of not. I'm sure at the time it was more of a problem than I would expect. Listen, I disagree with members on my team all the time. And in fact, I hold my tongue fairly often. Somebody does something that I disagree with, and I'm like, it's just not particularly important for me, or it is important to me, but I let it go. Um, I do that fairly regularly, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with this sort of fractionalism. Where it does become wrong is when various fractions start hindering each other, and that's what democratic centralism is supposed to deal with. Um, but in this case, what they're saying is essentially, oh, even if you have a method for dealing with people who don't agree fully with everything that's going on, um, that's a problem. I think that's admirable. I just don't think that it is profoundly important. Sometimes some people gotta sit down and shut up, especially in tense situations. And these people know that they know full well. Sometimes you just gotta suspend this process where everybody has to enter into agreement, universal consensus. And it's kind of like, well, okay, if you understand that, then maybe you can also understand that, maybe you never need to have that because there's never a circumstance where that's entirely 100% viable. So maybe you should be doing things in a little different way. I don't know. I've not seen too much stuff directly talking about organic centralism. Um, as usual, this is entirely reticent in actually explaining in concrete terms anything because they seem to feel that any amount of explanation in concrete terms makes it so you're less able to organically figure it out yourself through trial and error for your material conditions, which is pretty fucking funny. um, and I've been accused of my brain just not being wired right for it, which is also pretty funny. Because that automatically, in this case, would mean that I shouldn't be part of a party. Because if my brain is wired incorrectly, that means I'm going to be doing some fractionalism, right? Because I'm not going to agree with this. If my perception is so fundamentally distinct, where I'm just like, no, this is fucking stupid, then, either I gotta bite my tongue and you gotta have some sort of methodology of establishing that, or you got a problem there. Anyway, continuing. Such a guarantee doesn't actually exist, and the whole approach to the problem is inadequate. The fact of the matter is that the spread of fractionalism hasn't been within the international hasn't been avoided, but has been encouraged instead to assume masked and hypocritical forms. Besides which, from a historical point of view, the overcoming of fractions in the Russian party wasn't an expedient or magical recipe applied on statutory grounds, but was the outcome and the expression of a sound approach to questions of doctrine and political action. Okay, alright, fine. Yes, Lenin looked at his conditions and he prescribed, through that analysis of his conditions, the organizational format that should be taken. And he said, do it. And he organized to carry that out. And yes, there's all sorts of spontaneous individual initiative and all sorts of wonderful things, heroic actions like that, certainly. But the fact that somebody can go in and say before they're going to do what they're going to do, what they're going to do, automatically means that this is not simply, organic, right? In that sense. Um, head empty. Disciplinary sanctions are one of the elements that prevent degeneration, but on the understanding they are only applied in exceptional cases and do not become the norm and become almost the ideal of how the party should function. Okay, no, that's fair, right? They're basically saying, all right, so you got all these people and they will toe the line, but only when the line has been crossed that that people actually do disciplinary action. And that's always going to be the case. There's never going to be a situation where that's not the case. I'm not sure what they're getting at there. The solution doesn't reside in a useless increase in hierarchical authoritarianism, whose initial investiture is lacking both because of the incompleteness of the historical experience in Russia, impressive though they are, and because even within the old guard, custodians of the Bolshevik traditions, disagreements have been resolved in ways which cannot be considered as a priori the best ones. But neither does the solution lie in the systematic application of principles of formal democracy, which for Marxism have no other function than as organizational practices which can be occasionally convenient. The Communist parties must achieve an organic centralism which, whilst including as much consultation with the base as possible, ensures a spontaneous elimination of any grouping which starts to differentiate itself. This cannot be achieved by means of the formal and mechanical prescriptions of a hierarchy, but, as Lenin says, by means of correct revolutionary politics. The repression of factionalism isn't a fundamental aspect of the evolution of the party, although preventing it is. Okay. Again, I disagree with all sorts of stuff. People in my staff say I disagree with all sorts of stuff that they do. I just don't find it particularly important all the time. And if somebody disagrees, then we will talk about it. And if nobody can come to any conclusion, then we'll deal with it on that end. Right. And just because people regularly find disagreements doesn't mean that they leave. It doesn't mean that we expel them or anything like that from their moderator position. Such a thing would be ridiculous. Gosh. Okay. All right. So simple discipline and decision making processes cannot be used all the time. Discipline and democratic decision making process cannot be used all the time because other systems simply suppress fractionalism. We need one that actually deals with it instead. Organic centralism must be used instead. It ensures as much consultation with the base as possible, spontaneously eliminates any groupings which start to differentiate itself. Does this through everybody being on board with the correct revolutionary politics and everyone not on board being pushed out. This is kind of democracy, by the way. I just want to say that. It's just that in democratic centralism, the people who disagree with this particular thing don't just get kicked out of the party, which is a form of discipline, by the way. So organic centralism is, in this sense, is ultimately just combining democratic centralism and discipline, but in a much more virulent way. Unless I'm misunderstanding something about the process here. But again, it's not actually explained any of the actual methodologies in a concrete way because it's allergic to such things. They think that will sully the purity or something and make it so people do what they said to do, I guess. I don't know. I don't understand. I sincerely do not comprehend the mindset that goes into this sort of stuff on the basis that they put it out there. Continuing. Since it is fruitless and absurd, not to say extremely dangerous, to claim that the party and the international are somehow mysteriously insured against any relapse or tendency to relapse into opportunism, which could just as well depend on changing circumstances or on the playing out of residual social democratic traditions, then we must admit that every difference of opinion not reducible to cases of conscious or personal defeatism could well develop a useful function in the resolution of our problems and serve to protect the party and the proletariat in general from the risk of serious danger. These dangers accentuate them. Differentiation will inevitably, but usefully, take on the fractionist form. This could lead to schisms, as if removing everybody who differentiates themselves isn't producing a schism. Oh gosh. This could lead to schisms, not, however, for the childish reason of lack of repressive energies on the part of the leaders, but only in the awful hypothesis that the party fails and becomes subject to counter revolutionary influences. We have an example of the wrong method in the artificial solutions applied to the plight of the German party after the opportunist crisis in 1923, when whilst these artifices failed to eliminate fractionalism, they at the same time hindered the spontaneous determination within the ranks of the highly advanced German proletariat of the correct classes and revolutionary response to the degeneration of the party. Historically, the perils of bourgeois influence on the party doesn't appear. Actually, is this in any way concrete? No, uh, it's not. Okay, it's not concrete. Historically, the peril of bourgeois influence on the party doesn't appear as an organization of fractions, but rather as a shrewd penetration which stokes up unitary demagoguery and operates as a dictatorship from above, immobilizing initiatives by the proletarian vanguard. The identification and elimination of such a defeatist factor is achieved not by posing the issue of discipline against fractionist initiatives, but rather by managing to orient the party and the proletariat against such an insidious danger which takes on the aspect of not just a doctrinal revision, but as an express proposal for important political maneuver with anti-classist consequences. Okay. All right, so bourgeois influences tend to appear as hierarchical bureaucratic power on top, which invokes unity while mobilizing initiatives on the ground. These influences are defeatist in character, they cannot be defeated in turn by discipline. Rather, the party and proletariat must be oriented against this party, bureaucracy, and the party. These fractions must be expelled when they take on important political stances with anti classist consequences. So, in other words, it's saying that these fractions that get expelled are done so when they take on particular stances that are quote unquote important and result in things that harms the class struggle. So I suppose this clears some things up, right? We don't know what particularly is meant by important, though we can make some guesses. For example, whether or not we should align with another party that happens to be liberal, or something along those lines, right? Um, but not a lesser thing because it also actually I should have taken uh because it said somewhere else individuals. Maybe I was further down. I don't know. Where was that? One negative effect, I couldn't find it. One negative effect of so called Bolshevization has been the replacing of consciousness and thoroughgoing uh, political elaboration inside the party, corresponding to significant progress towards a really compact centralism, with superficial and noisy agitation for mechanical formulas unity for unity's sake and discipline for discipline's sake. The consequence of this method is both damaging to the party and to the proletariat and delays the attainment of the quote true Communist Party. This method, applied in several sections of the International, is itself a serious indication of latent opportunism. At the moment, there doesn't appear to any international left opposition within the Comintern. But if the unfavorable factors we have mentioned worsened, the formation of such an opposition will at the same time be both a revolutionary necessity and a spontaneous reflex to the situation. Part 6. Tactical questions up to the 5th Congress. Mistaken decisions have been made in the way of the tactical problems posed by the previously mentioned international situations were settled. Like analogous mistakes made in the organizational sphere, they derive from the claim that everything can be deduced from problems previously faced by the Russian Communist Party. The United Front tactic shouldn't be interpreted as a political coalition with other so-called workers' parties, but as a utilization of immediate demands of particular situations to increase the Communist Party's influence over the masses without compromising its autonomous position. The basis for a united front must therefore be sought in the political organization which workers join because of their social position and independently of their political faith or affiliation to an organized party. The reason is twofold. Firstly, communists aren't prevented from criticizing other parties or gradually recruiting new members who used to be dependent on these other parties into the ranks of the Communist Party. And secondly, it ensures that the masses will understand the party when it eventually calls on them to mobilize behind its program and under its exclusive leadership. Okay, we're going to take this. The United Front is I wrote that wrong. The United Front should be understood as organization for immediate demands in such ways to increase the Communist Party's influence on the masses. At no point can the party give up autonomy. Individual workers in the Communist Party can join the United Front and within it agitate against anti-classist positions, criticize the social pacifist stances, and recruit people from the United Front into the party. Continuing. Experience has shown us countless times that the only way of ensuring a revolutionary application of the United Front lies in rejecting political coalitions, whether permanent or temporary, along with committees which include representation of different political parties as means of directing the struggle. Also, there should be no negotiations, proposals for common action, and open letters to other parties from the Communist Party. Practical experience has proved how fruitless these methods are, and even any initial effect has been discredited by the abuses with which they have been put. No open letters. Isn't the entire point to be criticizing openly these other organizations? To be attacking them on a class ground? In what world is not having open letters to these other parties in order to criticize their position not something that should be done? I don't understand. I get saying no negotiations or proposals for common action. I get that. But no open letters? I must be misunderstanding something. I don't know. I must be misunderstanding something. Or maybe they just got completely embarrassed because they sent an open letter that was poorly written or something, and now they're once bitten, twice shy or something. I don't know. Okay. Continuing. The political United Front, based on the central demand of the seizure of the state, becomes the quote workers' government tactic. Here we have not only an erroneous tactic, but also a blatant contradiction of the principles of communism. Once a party issues a call for the assumption of power by the proletariat through the representative organisms of the bourgeois state apparatus, or even merely refrains from explicitly condemning such an eventuality, then has abandoned and rejected the communist program not only vis-a-vis proletarian ideology, with all the inevitable damaging consequences, but because the party itself would be establishing and accrediting this ideological formulation. The revision to this tactic made at the Fifth Congress after the defeat in Germany hasn't proved satisfactory, and the latest developments in the realm of tactical experimentation justify calls for the abandonment of even the expression, quote, workers' government. As far as the central problem of the state is concerned, the party should issue the call for the dictatorship of the proletariat, and that alone. There is no other workers' government. The slogan, workers' government, leads opportunism into opportunism alone. I support for or participation in self-styled pro-worker government of the bourgeois class. None of this contradicts the slogan, all power to the Soviets, and to Soviet-type organisms, representative bodies elected by workers, even when opportunist parties predominate in them. The opportunist parties oppose the assumption of power by proletarian organizations, since this is precisely the dictatorship of the proletariat, exclusion of non-workers from the elective organs and power. That's not what the dictatorship of the proletariat is. It's something that the dictatorship of the proletariat can involve, but we just did a reading on this. The commune was a good example of was the example Marx and Engels gave of the dictatorship of the proletariat, and it certainly didn't have only workers in positions of political power. Okay, continuing. You know, thinking about it, right? Maybe I'm going about this the entire wrong way. These people, their position is essentially that the forms of organization doesn't matter. A truly communist organization will be one that is made up solely of communist people, individuals, who are therefore taking up communist aims. To that end, essentially, but wouldn't this be a workerist conclusion if they're going after that and they rejected that? I don't know, but if they're considering that really what or maybe the workers' position is that no, yeah, no, this doesn't actually contradict, because a workers thing would basically say that the workers are naturally communists, whereas they would reject such a thing. So maybe for these guys, it doesn't matter what the format is or anything like that, so long as it's staffed only by communists. And therefore, a really worker state would be one that is only staffed by workers. Um, and a really communist organization is one that is staffed only by workers. And therefore, the organization form or anything like that doesn't matter. It's just who's in it, which is problematic. Yeah, if everybody in the organization is a worker, then there is a tendency and a pressure to a particular condition. And yes, if you follow particular tactics, and whatnot, then eventually that will merge into the proper organizational formats, because your first goal is to establish an organization. And I suppose it would say your first goal is to establish an organization made up only by workers or something. But I just I don't get it. Or maybe I am getting it now, and that's really all it comes down to. Maybe I need to address that particular aspect of it when I next get into this godforsaken argument about whether or not we can say anything about organizational forms. Part 7. The question of the, quote, new tactics. The United Front and the workers' government used to be justified on the following grounds: that having communist parties wasn't enough to achieve victory, since it was necessary to conquer the masses. In order to conquer the masses, the influence of the Social Democrats had to be fought on the terrain of those demands which are understood by all workers. Today, a second step has been taken, and a perilous question is posed. To ensure our victory, they say, we must first ensure that the bourgeoisie is governing in a tolerant and compliant way, or that classes intermediate between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat should govern, allowing us to make preparations. This latter position, by admitting the possibility of a government originating from the middle classes, sinks to the total revision of Marx's doctrine and is equivalent to the counter-revolutionary platform of reformism. And yeah, this is really fucking common whenever election season comes around in America. We get we're it's safe for organizing under Biden. It's safe for organizing under the Democrats. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. God, it absolute brain rot. I don't even know what to say there. Anyway, the first position aims to refer solely to the objective utility of conditions insofar as they allow propaganda, agitation, and organization to be carried out. As we've already pointed out with regards to particular situations, both are equally dangerous. Everything leads us to predict that liberalism and bourgeois democracy, whether in antithesis or in synthesis with the, quote, fascist method, will evolve in such a way as to exclude the Communist Party from their juridical guarantees, for what little they're worth, since it places itself outside them by negating such guarantees in its program. It's technically illegal in America still for communists to run for any public office. Now, that isn't actually pursued, but at all points, the threat remains that that law could actually be put into effect. Such an evolution in no way contradicts the principles of bourgeois democracy. In any case, it has real precedent in the work of all the so-called left-wing governments, and, for example, in the program of the Italian Aventine Parliament. Any, quote, freedom given to the proletariat will just mean substantially greater freedom for counter-revolutionary agents to agitate and organize within its ranks. The only freedom for the proletariat lies in its dictatorship. We have already mentioned that even if a left-wing government created conditions that we have found useful, that would not actually be the Taft-Hartley Act in this case, irony. That would be the Anti-Communist Act, if I remember correctly. And a bunch of states have additional stuff. Taft-Hartley is focused on unions, and it does a whole bunch of different stuff. I have a summary of the stuff in it and what the effects are, in the sense of, it bans all black cat strikes. It makes the workers striking without approval from the union leaders illegal. What's the problem with that? Well, it's that should be obvious, but where's my thing? On black cat. Oh, no, frick it. Taft had this much better written. Alright, so no jurisdictional strikes. Wildcat, that's it. Strikes against non-union workers getting jobs that union workers should get. This makes it so that strikebreakers have no problems walking in. The union is getting in the way to simply reshuffle union workers into less central jobs. So this straight out removes any real union power in the workplace. Wildcat strikes are not organized and voted on by union leadership. If the union is taken over by the company to become a yellow union, led by boss aligned workers that work against their fellow union members, then this makes it essentially impossible to strike. Gives the company vast power over the union. Solidarity or political strikes. While companies can donate absurd amounts of money to political candidates, unions can't donate anything legally, nor can they go on strike against a political candidate. For example, the IWW said that they're going on general strike against a candidate that would not end until the political candidate was no longer in office, or striking until a bill or something is passed is an illegal strike. In addition, this effectively bans general strikes too. Legally, you can only strike against your own corporation. You can't join in with other unions. This is a, quote, secondary boycotts, too, where entire sectors fought by strike regardless of what corporation you're in. This removes political, economic, and organizational power from unions and removes any revolutionary capacity you might have ever had. Mass picketing is illegal. Literally bringing too many people to a picket line. This essentially removes any ability to picket because they can declare mass picketing whenever they want, more or less. Removing any power to unions to fight against strike breakers. 5. Closed shops. Unions forcing agreement that companies only hiring union workers and that all employees must be union members. This tears up any capacity for a union to mass control over their workplaces or even real control over hiring. 6. Monetary donations by unions to federal and political campaigns. 7. States' right to pass right to work laws by banning union shops. So essentially, they can ban you at any time for any reason. And of course, totally, they don't do that to people who are unionizing. In addition, workers can vote on union leadership, but they are unable to decide who to vote on. Rather, the companies decide on who can be on the ballot for union leadership. This means that after a union is first created, the next generation of leaders will almost certainly be company workers and turn the union into a yellow union. Wildcat strikes banned. This removes the ability for the workers to do anything about it, and the existence of a union makes it functionally impossible to get rid of while creating a non-yellow one. So, yeah. Anyway, back to the text. In Germany, to habituate the proletariat to picking out voluntary or involuntary supporters from within the bourgeois front would be to induce a factor of defeat, even if any intrinsic weaknesses of any part of this front will clearly be a factor of victory. In Germany, after the election of Hindenburg, an electoral alliance with social democracy and other, quote, Republican parties, i.e., bourgeois parties, such as the Parliamentary Alliance in the Prussian Landtag, was proclaimed in order to avoid a right wing government. In France, support was given to the Cartel des Gauchins in the last municipal elections, the Clichy tactic. For the reasons given above, such tactical methods must be declared unacceptable. Even the theses of the Second Congress of the Communist International on revolutionary parliamentarism impose on the Communist Party the duty of only operating on electoral terrain on the basis of rigorously independent positions. The examples of recent tactics indicated above show a clear, though not complete, historical affinity with the traditional methods of the Second International, electoral blocks, and collaborationism, which were also justified by laying claim to a Marxist interpretation. Such methods represent a real danger to the principles and organizations of the International. Incidentally, no international congresses have passed resolutions which authorize them. That includes the tactical theses presented at the Fifth Congress. So this entire section I agree with wholeheartedly. The idea that, it's easier to organize in a quote unquote left wing bourgeois government, and that we should align again. We should align with bourgeois parties in order to get them in position so that we can organize easier is absolute bunk. Anyway, continuing. 8. The union question. On the global level, the International has successively modified its conception of the relationship between political and economic organisms. Herein lies a remarkable example of the method which, rather than having particular actions derived from principles, prefers to improvise various new theories to justify actions chosen because of their apparent ease of execution, their likelihood of producing quick results. The International originally supported the admission of unions to the Communist International. Then it formed a Red International Labor Union. It was held that since the unions were the best point of contact with the masses, each Communist Party should struggle for trade union unity, and to therefore not create its own unions through citizens from unions led by the Yellows. Nevertheless, on the international level, the Bureau of Amsterdam International was to be considered and treated not as an organization of the proletarian masses, but as a counter-revolutionary political organ of the League of Nations. At a certain point, based on considerations which are certainly very important, but limited mainly to a project for using the left wing of the English Union movement, it was announced that the Red International Labor Union should be abandoned in order to effect an organic unity on an international scale with the Amsterdam Bureau. No amount of conjecture about changing circumstances can justify such a major policy shift, since the question of the relations between international political organizations and trade unions is one of principle, inasmuch as it boils down to that of the relations between the party and class for the revolutionary mobilization. Is there anything I should take here? No, it's fine. Internal statutory guarantees weren't respected either, since this decision was present to the relevant internal organs as a fait accompli. The retention of Moscow against Amsterdam as our watchword hasn't prevented the struggle for trade union unity in each nation, and nor will it. In fact, the liquidation of separatist tendencies in the unions, Germany and Italy, was only made possible by addressing the separatists' argument that the proletariat was being prevented from freeing itself from the influence of the Amsterdam International. On the other hand, the apparent enthusiasm with which our party in France adheres to the proposition of world trade union unity didn't prevent it from demonstrating an absolute incapacity to deal with de facto with the problem of trade union unity at a national level in a non-secessionist way. Do they mean schism? No. Yeah, I really wish that they would just use regular language. They've used the word schism before. Keep on using it. Anyway. The utility of the United Front tactic on a world basis isn't, however, ruled out, even with the union organizations that belong to the Amsterdam International. The left wing of the Italian party has always supported and struggled for proletarian unity in the trade unions, and this serves to distinguish it from profoundly syndicalist and voluntarist pseudo-lefts which were fought by Lenin. Furthermore, the left in Italy has a thoroughly Leninist conception of the problems of the relations between trade unions and factory councils. On the basis of the Russian experience and of the relevant theses of the Second Congress, the left rejects a serious deviation from principle, which consists of depriving the trade unions, based on voluntary membership, of any revolutionary importance in order to substitute the utopian and reactionary concept of a constitutional apparatus with obligatory membership, which extends organically over the entire area of the system of capitalist production. In practice, this error is expressed by an overestimation of the role of the factory councils to the extent of effectively boycotting the trade union. Okay. We're going to take this, but I'm not going to bother summarizing it yet. Part 9, the agrarian question. The agrarian question has been defined by Lenin's theses of the Second Congress of the International. The main aim of this thesis was to restore the problem of agricultural production to its historic place in the Marxist system, and show that in an epoch where the premises for the socialization of enterprises has already matured in the industrial economy, they were still lacking in the agricultural economy. Far from delaying the proletarian revolution, which alone will create these premises, this state of affairs renders the problems of the poor peasants insoluble within the framework of industrial economy and bourgeois power. This allows the proletariat to link its own struggle with freeing the poor peasant from a system of exploitation by landed proprietors and the bourgeoisie, even if freeing the peasants doesn't coincide with a general change in the rural productive economy. Large-scale landed property, deemed as such in law, is technically speaking composed of tiny productive enterprises. When the legal superstructure that holds it together is destroyed, we witness a redivision of land amongst the peasants. In reality, this is nothing other than the freeing of these small productive enterprises already separated from a collective exploitation. This can only happen if the property relations are broken up in a revolutionary way, but the protagonist of this rupture can only be the industrial proletariat. The reason for this is that the proletariat, as distinct from the peasant, isn't merely a victim of the relations of bourgeois production, but is a historical product of its maturity, condemning it to clear the path to a new, different system of production. The proletariat will therefore find precious reinforcement in the revolt of the poor peasant. The essential elements in Lenin's tactical conclusions are, firstly, that there's a fundamental distinction to be made between the proletariat's relations with the peasant class and its relations with the reactionary middle strata of the urban economy, mainly represented by the social democratic parties. And secondly, there's the definitive principle of the preeminence and hegemony of the working class as leader of the revolution. We'll take this. Insofar as the problem is, agrarian relations are significantly different in modernity within developed nations where we don't really have these peasants anymore. Um, so I don't know how useful this is in our case. Continue. The peasant therefore appears at the moment of the conquest of power as a revolutionary factor. But if during the revolution his ideology is modified as regards the old forms of authority and legality, it doesn't much change with regards to relation of production, which remain the traditional ones of isolated family farms in mutual competition with one another. Thus, the peasant still represents a threat to the construction of the socialist economy, and only the large-scale development of the productive capacity in agricultural technology is likely to interest him. On the tactical and organizational plane, the landless agricultural proletariat, day laborers, must be considered, in Lenin's view, the same as the rest of the proletariat and be incorporated into the same framework. Policy of proletarian alliance with the poor peasants, working alone on their plots of land on whatever level of sufficiency, becomes policy of mere neutralization with regards to the middle peasant, who is characterized as both being a victim of certain capitalist relations and an exploiter of labor. Finally, there's the wealthy peasant who is generally an exploiter of labor and the direct enemy of the revolution. So somebody says land redivision among the peasantry isn't really communist, but allows the breaking of the backs of the large landowners prior to the building of sufficient administrative capacity within the communist state to absorb such holdings in the form of collective farms. Yeah. In the field of agrarian tactics, the International must avoid these mistaken applications already discernible, for instance, in the policies of the French Party, which is drawn to the idea of a new type of peasant revolution be considered on the same level as the workers' revolution, or to the belief that the revolutionary movement of the workers may be determined by an insurrection in the countryside, whilst in fact the actual relation is the other way around. So they're saying that essentially the revolution will start not in the countryside but in the cities. Uh, Continuing, the peasant, once won over to the communist program and therefore accessible to political organization, should become a member of the Communist Party. This is the only way to combat the rise of parties comprised solely of peasants, inevitably prey to counter-revolutionary influences. The Crescentern Peasants International must incorporate the peasant organizations of all countries characterized, like workers' trade unions, by the fact of accepting as members all those who have the same immediate economic interests. Also, the tactics of political negotiation, the United Front, for constitution of fractions within the peasant parties, even with the intention of breaking them up, must be rejected. Its tactical norm is not odds with the relations established between the Bolsheviks and the social revolutionaries during the Civil War period, when the new representative organizations of the proletariat and the peasants already existed. Again, not too much of importance in that section simply because profoundly different conditions. Part 10, the national question. Lyon has also produced a fundamental clarification of the theory of the popular movement in colonial countries, in certain exceptionally backward countries. Even though internal economic development and the expansion of foreign capital hasn't provided a mature basis for modern class struggle in these countries, demands are being made which can only be resolved by insurrectional struggle and the defeat of world imperialism. In the epoch of struggle for proletarian revolution in metropolises, the complete realization of these two conditions will allow the launching of a struggle which, nevertheless, will take on locally the aspects of a conflict not of class, but of races and nationalities. The fundamental tenets of the Leninist conception nevertheless still remain that the world struggle will be directed by organs of the revolutionary proletariat, and that the indigenous class struggle and the independent development of local communist parties must be encouraged and never held back or stifled. Okay. Actually, we'll get this next paragraph, I'm sure. The extension, however, of these considerations to countries in which a capitalist regime and the bourgeois state apparatus has been established for a long time constitutes a danger, insofar as here the national question and patriotic ideology become counter-revolutionary devices and serve only to disarm the proletariat as a class. Such deviations appear, for example, in the concessions made by Radek with regard to German nationalists fighting against the inter-allied occupation. Okay, we're going to add that. That's a good bit. It gives an actual example. The International must also call for the stamping out in Czechoslovakia of any nationalist and dualist reaction within the proletarian organizations, since the two races are at the same historical level and their common economic environment is completely evolved. To elevate the struggle of the national minorities per se to the level of the matter of principle is therefore to distort the communist conception, since altogether different criteria are required to discern whether such struggles offer revolutionary possibilities or reactionary developments. I'm also going to take that. That's a good bit right there. Part 11. Russian questions. Most certainly not going to be of use for us. The new political economy of the Russian state, based mainly on Lenin's 1921 speech on the tax in kind, and Trotsky's report of the Fourth World Congress, is evidently an important matter for the Communist International. Given the condition of the Russian economy and the fact that the bourgeoisie remains in power in other countries, Marxists couldn't have presented otherwise the prospects for the development of the world revolution and the construction of the socialist economy. The serious political difficulties that the internal relations of social forces and the problems of productive technology and foreign relations have caused the Russian state have led to a series of divergences within the Russian Communist Party. It is really deplorable that the international communist movement hasn't found a way of making more soundly based and authoritative pronouncements on the matter. In the first discussion with Trotsky, his considerations on the internal life of the party and its new course were undoubtedly correct, and his observations on the development of the state's political economy were also, on the whole, clearly revolutionary and proletarian. In the second discussion, he was no less justified when he remarked on the International's mistakes, and demonstrated that the best traditions of the Bolsheviks did not militate in favor of the way the Comintern was being led. The way that the party reacted to this internal debate was inadequate and contrived, due to a well-known method of relying on anti-fractionalists and even worse, anti-Bonapartist intimidation based on absolutely nothing of substance. As to the latest discussion, it must above all be realized that it revolves around problems of an international nature. And just because the majority of the Russian Communist Party has pronounced on the issue, that there's no reason why the International cannot discuss and pronounce on it in its turn. The question still stands, even if it has ceased to be asked by the defeated opposition. As has often happened, questions of procedure and discipline have stifled really essential questions. What is at issue here is not the defense of the rights of a minority, whose leaders are at least co-responsible for numerous errors committed on the international level, but rather the questions of vital importance for the world movement. The Russian question must be brought before the International for an in-depth study. The following features must be taken into account. Today, the Russian economy is composed, according to Lenin, of elements that are pre-bourgeois, bourgeois, state capitalist, and socialist. State-controlled large-scale industry is socialist insofar as it is production organized by and in the hands of a politically proletarian state. The distribution of the products derived from this industry operates, however, under a capitalist form, namely through the competitive free market mechanism. One cannot deny in principle that workers will not only be kept in less than brilliant economic circumstances by the system, in fact, that is the case, even if they do accept it because of the revolutionary consciousness that they have acquired, but will also evolve into the direction of an increased extraction of surplus value by means of the price paid by the workers for foodstuffs, and the prices paid by the state for its purchases, as well as the conditions it obtains in concessions, commerce, and all relations with foreign capitalism. It is therefore necessary to ask whether the socialist elements in the Russian economy are increasing or decreasing, a problem that also means taking into account the degree of technical efficiency and how well the state industries are organized. So I actually am going to scroll up and open another one because I want to add this to the discussion on the dictatorship of the proletariat. Give me a second. Okay. And we're going to post that, and we're going to post this. Continuing, the building of full socialism extended to production and distribution, to industry and agriculture, is impossible in just one country. But the progressive development of the socialist elements in the Russian economy can nevertheless be achieved by thwarting the plans of the counter-revolutionaries, supported inside Russia by the rich peasants, new bourgeoisie, and the petty bourgeoisie, and outside the country by the imperialist powers. Whether such counter-revolutionary plotting takes the form of internal or external aggression, or a progressive sabotage and influencing of Russian social and state life, such as the force of progressive involution and deproletarianization of its main features, is a fundamental condition for success that all parties belonging to the international collaborate with each other and are able to make their contribution. After all, it is a matter of assuring the Russian proletariat and the Russian Communist Party of the active support of the proletarian vanguard, especially in the imperialist countries. Not only must aggression be prevented, and pressure is exerted against the bourgeois state as regards their relations with Russia, but most importantly of all, the Russian party needs to be helped by its brother parties to resolve its problems. Whilst these other parties, it is true, do not possess direct experience of governmental problems, nonetheless, they can help resolve them by acting as a classist and revolutionary coefficient, with experience derived directly from the real class struggles taking place in their respective countries. As we have shown above, the internal relationships of the international do not lend themselves to this task. Urgent changes therefore need to be made in order to redress the problems in the realm of politics and in the tactical and organizational spheres that have been exacerbated by, quote, Bolshevization. Part 3, Italian Questions, Section 1, The Italian Situation. Evaluations of the Italian situation that attribute decisive value to the insufficient development of industrial capitalism are wrong. The weak expansion of industry in a quantitative sense, along with its relatively late historical appearance, were counterbalanced by a set of other circumstances which allowed the bourgeoisie to completely entrench itself politically during the period of Risorgimento and develop an extremely rich and complex tradition of government. The political polarities that historically characterized conflicting parties, such as the old left and right division, clericalism, and masonry, that would be the Freemasons, and democracy and fascism, cannot be automatically identified with the social differences which exist between land proprietors, capitalists, and the big and petty bourgeoisie. The fascist movement must be understood as the attempt to politically unify the conflicting interests of various bourgeois groups under the banner of counter revolution. Fascism, created and directly fostered by the entire upper classes, landowners, industrialists, commercial sectors, bankers, supported by the traditional state apparatus, the monarchy, the church, and masonry, pursued this aim by mobilizing elements within the disintegrating middle classes which, in close alliance with the bourgeoisie as a whole, it has managed to deploy against the proletariat. What has taken place in Italy shouldn't be interpreted as the arrival in power of a new social strata, as the formation of a new state apparatus with a program and ideology, nor as the defeat of part of the bourgeoisie whose interests would be better served by the adoption of liberal and parliamentary methods. The Democrats and the Liberals, the Needies and the Giolitis, are the protagonists of a phase of counter-revolutionary struggle which is dialectically linked to the fascist phase and just as decisive in effecting the proletarian defeat. In fact, it was precisely their concessionary politics and the complicity of reformists and maximalists which allowed the bourgeoisie to resist the pressure from the proletariat and head it off during the post-war period of demobilization, at precisely the time when every component of the dominant class was unprepared for a frontal attack. Directly favored in this period of governments, the bureaucracy, police, judiciary, army, etc., fascism has since gone on to completely replace the bourgeoisie's old political personnel. However, we shouldn't be fooled by this, and neither should it serve as a reason for rehabilitating parties and groups who were removed not because they achieved better conditions for the working class, but because for the time being they had completed their anti-proletarian task. Part 2. Political positions of the communist left. As the above situation was taking shape, the group which formed the Communist Party set out with these criteria: a break from the illusory dualisms of the bourgeoisie and parliamentary political scene, and an affirmation of the revolutionary antagonism between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. Propaganda amongst the proletariat aimed at destroying the illusion that the middle classes were capable of producing a political general staff. General staff in this case means basically people who can take up leadership during the revolution in a military sense, of taking power and clearing the way for proletarian victories, instilling confidence in the proletariat in its own historic tasks through propaganda based on a series of critical, political, and tactical positions, which are original and autonomous, and solidly linked through successive situations. That rather succinctly states it. Alright, so the Communist Party aims to show the necessity of class struggle to the proletariat, show that the class struggle cannot be done with in legal terms, which are decided by the bourgeoisie, show that the middle classes lack the ability to produce a political general staff, that is, lead the revolution insofar as the party does that, take power, and allow victories for the proletariat. So, for example, voting in Biden will allow an easier ability to organize. It's dog shit. It's not a thing. In addition, the Communist Party also aims to instill confidence in the proletariat about carrying out revolution. This is done through propaganda in terms of correct positions and propaganda in successful operations. Basically having very, very good reputation. Back to the text. The tradition of this political current goes back to the left wing of the Socialist Party before the war. Whilst the majority of capable struggling both against the errors of the reformists and syndicalists, the latter having personified the proletarian left until then, was formed at the congresses of Reggio Emilia, 1912, and Ancona, 1914. An extreme left aspiring to even more radical classist solutions also emerged within this majority. Important problems for the working class were correctly resolved during this period, namely in regards to questions of electoral tactics, links with the trade unions, colonial war, and Freemasonry. During the World War, virtually the entire party opposed the Union Sacré politics, and at successive meetings at Congresses, Bologna, May 1915, Rome, February 1917, Florence, November 1917, and Rome again, 1918. Its extreme left wing, now clearly differentiated, defended the following Leninist positions: rejection of national defense and defeatism, exploitation of military defeat to pose the question of power, an unceasing struggle against the opportunist trade union and parliamentary leaders, along with their call for expulsion from the party. Immediately after the war, Il Soviet became the mouthpiece of the extreme left and the first newspaper to support the policies of the Russian Revolution and to confront anti Marxist, opportunist, syndicalist, and anarchist misinterpretations. It correctly set out the essential problems of the proletarian dictatorship and the party's tasks. From the very start, defended the necessity of a split in the Socialist Party. This same group supported electoral abstentionism, but the Second Congress of the International would dismiss its conclusions. Its abstentionism, however, didn't derive from the anti-Marxist theoretical errors of the anarcho-syndicalist type, as its resolute polemics against anarchist press have shown. The application of the abstentionist tactic was recommended above all for fully developed parliamentary democracies, because this political environment creates particular obstacles to the winning over the masses to an accurate understanding of the word, quote, dictatorship. Difficulties which, in our opinion, continue to be underestimated by the International. In the second place, abstentionism was proposed at a time when huge struggles were setting even huger huger mass movements into motion. Unfortunately, not the case today, and not as a tactic applicable for all times and all places. With the 1919 elections, the bourgeois needy government opened up an immense safety valve to the revolutionary pressure and diverted the proletarian offensive and attention of the party by exploiting its tradition of unbridled electoralism. Il Soviet's abstentionism was then entirely correct, in that it responded to the true causes of the proletarian disaster that ensued. At the subsequent Bologna Conference, October 1919, only the abstentionist minority posed correctly the position of a split with the reformists, but it sought in vain to come to agreement with a section of the maximalists on this point, even after abstentionism had been renounced in order to achieve it. The attempt having failed, the abstentionist fraction remained the only section of the party which, up until the Second World Congress, worked on a national scale for the formation of the Communist Party. Just as an aside, it's really annoying that they use the word fraction instead of faction. I don't know why it's annoying. It just is. Anyway, continuing. This is therefore the group which represented the spontaneous adherents setting out from its own experiences and traditions of the left of the Italian proletariat to the policies of Lenin and Bolshevism, which has lately emerged victorious with the Russian Revolution. Section 3. The work of the party's left leadership. Within the new Communist Party, constituted at Leghorn in January 1921, the abstentionists made every effort to forge solid links with other groupings in the party. But whilst for some of these groups, it was international relations alone which necessitated the split from the opportunists, for the abstentionists, who for discipline's sake had been expressly renounced their positions on elections. Indeed, for many other elements besides, it was because the theses of the International and the lessons of the recent political struggles were completely consistent with each other. In this work, the interpretation of the Italian situation and the tasks of the proletariat mentioned earlier inspired the party leadership. With hindsight, it is clear that the delay in the formation of the Revolutionary Party, for which other groups were responsible, made the subsequent proletarian retreat inevitable. In order to place the proletariat in the best position during the ensuing battles, the leadership took the stance that, although the greatest effort should be used to use the traditional apparatus of the Red organizations, it was also necessary to warn the proletariat not to count on anything from the maximalists and reformists, who would go even so far as to accept a peace treaty with fascism. From its very inception, the party defended the principle of trade union unity, going on to propose a central postulate of a united front, which culminated in the formation of the Labor Alliance. Whatever opinions one might have about the political united front, the fact is that the situation in Italy in 1921 to 22 made it impossibility. In fact, the party never received any invitation to attend any meetings aimed at founding an alliance of parties. The party didn't intervene at the meeting to constitute a trade union alliance called by the railway workers, because it didn't want to lend itself to maneuvers which might have compromised the alliance itself, and which might have been blamed on the party. It had already shown beforehand that that it approved of the initiative by stating that all communist workers within the new organization would observe discipline towards it. Certain contacts between political groups would eventually take place. The Communist Party wouldn't refuse to take part, but would come to nothing, demonstrating both the impossibility of arriving at an understanding on the terrain of political action and the defeatism of every other group. During the retreat, the leadership was able to preserve the confidence of the workers in their own class and raise the political consciousness of the vanguard by heading off the traditional maneuverings of pseudo-revolutionary groups and parties within the proletariat. Despite the efforts of the party, it was not until later, August 1922, that a generalized mobilization took place. The proletarian defeat was inevitable, and from then on, fascism, openly supported in their violent campaigns by the forces of declaredly, quote, liberal democratic state, became master of the country. The March on Rome, which happened afterwards, merely legitimized fascism's predomination in a formal sense. Even now, despite reducing proletarian activity, the party's influence still predominated over the maximalists and reformists, its progress having already been demonstrated by the 1921 elections, the results, and the extensive consultations that took place within the Confederation of Labor. Section 4. Relations between the Italian left and the Communist International. The Rome Congress, held in March 1922, crystallized a theoretical divergence between the Italian left majority of the International. The divergence which has been expressed before rather badly by our delegations to the Third World Congress and the enlarged executive of February 1922, where, especially on the first occasion, some errors of the infantilist variety were certainly committed. The Rome thesis would constitute the happy theoretical and political liquidation of any peril of left-wing opportunism in the Italian party. As far as the party practice was concerned, the only divergence with the International was over what tactic to adopt towards the Maximalists, but such divergences appeared resolved by the unitary results which emerged from the Socialist Congress in October 1921. The Rome theses were adopted as a contribution by the party to the International's decision-making and not as an immediate line of action. This was confirmed by the party directorate at the enlarged executive 1922, and we then embark on a theoretical debate precisely how discipline to the International and its ruling against it. In August 1922, however, the International didn't interpret the various factors in the same way as the party directorate, but reckoned that the Italian situation was unstable in the sense of the state's weakened resistance and the thought of reinforcing the party on the basis of a fusion with the Maximalists, considering as a decisive factor not the lessons learned during the vast strike maneuver in August, but the split between the Maximalists and the Unitarians. Actually, real quick. So apparently the Third International prescribed against engaging in theoretical debate. I assume because they're like, we don't want to know your reasonings behind it or anything. We just want to know what you're going to do, which is kind of funny. I understand why. I've been told that like the meetings of the Third International fill like nearly 2,000 pages in a cleaved down version of it. Anyway, it's from this moment that the two political lines diverge in a definite way. At the Fourth World Congress in December 1922, the old directorate opposed the majority thesis, and on their return to Italy, the delegates would pass the matter over to the Merger Commission, unanimously declining to take any responsibility for the decision, though of course retaining their administrative functions. Then came the arrests in February 1923 and a big offensive against the party. Finally, during the enlarged executive meeting, In June 1923, the old executive was deposed and completely replaced, and several party leaders would simply resign as a logical consequence. In May 1924, a party consultative conference would still give the left an overwhelming majority over the center and right. Thus, it would attend the Fifth World Congress in 1924. Part 5. The quote, Ordinovist tradition of the present leadership. The Ordine Nuovo group was formed in Turin by a group of intellectuals who established contact to the proletarian masses in industry at a time when the abstentionist fraction in Turin already had a large following. The volatile ideology of this group is mainly derived from philosophical conceptions of a bourgeois and idealist nature, partly inherited from Benedetto Croce. Crochet? Croquet? Crocet? I don't know. Names. This group aligned itself with communist directives very late in the day and would always display residual errors linked to its origins. It understood the significance of the Russian Revolution too late to be able to apply it usefully to the proletarian struggle in Italy. In November 1917, Comrade Gramsci published an article in Avanti asserting that the Russian Revolution had given the lie to his Marxist historical materialism and the theories in Capital, and gave an essentially idealist explanation. The extreme left current in that youth federation belonged to have responded immediately to this article. The subsequent ideological development of the Ordinovist group, as their publication Ordino Nuovo shows, has led to a non-Marxist and non-Leninist interpretation of the workers' movement. The question of the role of the unions in the party, armed struggle and the conquest of power, and the construction of socialism are not posed correctly in their theory, and they have evolved instead of the conception of a systematic organization of the laboring classes, which was, quote, necessary rather than, quote, voluntary, and strictly bound up with the mechanism of capital's industrial production. Setting out from the internal commissions, this system was supposed to culminate simultaneously in the proletarian and communist international, in the Soviets and in the worker state by the way of the factory councils, which are held to embody the latter even before the collapse of capitalist power. And what is more, even during the bourgeois epoch, this system was supposed to assume the function of constructing the new economy by calling for and exercising workers' control over production. Later on, all the Marxist aspects of Ordinovist ideology, utopianism, Proudhon-inspired syndicalism, and economic gradualism before the conquest of power, that is to say, reformism, were apparently dropped in order to be gradually substituted with the entirely different theories of Leninism. However, the fact that this substitution took place on a superficial and fictitious level could only have been avoided if the Ordinovists had split from and opposed the left, a group whose traditions, rather than converging with the Bolsheviks in an entirely impulsive way, represented a serious contribution, derived not from academic and bookish dissertations on bourgeois tones, but from proletarian class experience. Certainly, the Ordinovists hadn't been prevented from learning and improving within the strictly collaborative framework which was lacking later on. As it turns out, we greeted the announcements of the Ordinovist leaders with a certain tinge of irony when they announced that they were Bolshevizing the very people who had set them on the road to Bolshevik positions by serious and Marxist means, rather than by chattering about mechanistic and bureaucratic procedures. Okay, all right, bros, toot your own horn a little more. I'm sorry. It's like, okay, yeah, these guys were mostly what amounted to a book club of young revolutionaries, and they started out from more utopian position, and then once they did more research, their minds changed, the internals of the organization changed, and they said, hey, we're on board with this, and now you're making fun of them for it. And it's like, come on, guys. This is the kind of stuff that you expect from a Discord server. Not from a serious Marxist organization. Yeah, developing ideological lines is not allowed. Oh man. Continuing, up until shortly before the 1920 World Congress, the Ordinovists were opposed to a split in the old party. They posed all trade union questions incorrectly. The International's representative in Italy had to polemicize against them on the questions of factory councils and the premature constitutions of the Soviets. In April 1920, the Turn section approved the famous Ordine Nuovo thesis, which was drawn up by Comrade Gramsci and adopted by a committee composed of both Ordinovists and abstentionists. These theses, cited in the Second Congress's resolution, in fact expressed, despite disagreements about elections, the common thinking of the nascent communist fraction. They weren't distinctly Ordinavist positions, but consisted of points already clarified and accepted by the party's left wing long before. The Ordinovists would rally around the left's positions on the International for a while, but the thinking expressed in the Rome Theses was essentially different from theirs, even if they considered it opportune to vote for them. The true precursor of Ordinovism's present adherence to the tactics and general lie of the International was really Comrade Tasca and his opposition to the left at the Rome Congress. Given on the one hand, the Ordinovists' group characteristic particularism and its taste for the concrete inherited from idealist bourgeois positions. Oh yeah, so this is what Rosenberg, you know, accuses me of. How dare you demand concrete investigation and concrete examples and stuff? That would be idealism, right? And on the other hand, the superficial and therefore incomplete adherences allowed for by the International's leadership, we are forced to conclude, despite all their loud protestations of orthodoxy, that the theoretical adherence of decisive importance in terms of providing a basis for actual policies of the Ordinovists to Lenin is about as worthless as their adherence to their own theses. Okay, so, part 6, the political work of the present party leadership. From 1923 until now, the work of the party leadership, which we must bear in mind took place in difficult circumstances, has led to mistakes which are essentially similar to those pointed out apropos the international question, but which have been severely aggravated at least partly by the initial Ordinavist deviations. Participating in the 1924 elections was a very fortunate political act, but one cannot say the same about the proposal for joint action with the socialist parties, nor the way it was labeled, quote, proletarian unity. Just as deplorable was the excessive tolerance shown towards some of Terzini's electoral maneuvers. But the most serious problems are posed apropos the open crisis that followed Matteotti's assassination. The leadership's policies were based on the absurd view that the weakening of fascism would propel the middle classes into action first and then the proletariat. This implied, on the one hand, a lack of faith in the capacity of the proletariat to act as a class, despite its continued alertness under the suffocating strictures of fascism, and on the other, an overestimation of the initiative of the middle class. In fact, even without referring to the clear Marxist theoretical positions on this matter, the central lesson to draw from the Italian experience has been that the intermediary layers will passively tail along behind the strongest and may therefore back either side. Thus, in 1919 to 20, they backed the proletariat. Then, between 1921 to 3, they went behind fascism. And now, after a significant period of major upheaval in 1924 to 25, they are backing fascism again. Wait, these numbers 1921 to 23, they went behind fascism. And then 1924 to 25, they're backing fascism. So they just continued to back fascism. So why make a distinction? Um, so Manos Geo says I thought it was a security concern. You know, I think that would potentially apply if they were talking about names and stuff. I don't think that applies when we're talking about generalities at all. quite the opposite. In fact, all these structural organs should be completely replaceable. Anybody within the party should be replaceable. You just, oh, somebody's not doing their job correctly, you're out, this other person's in. The whole point of the division of labor in this sense. Um, but I don't know. And apparently, everybody's supposed to be at least generally aware of the activities of the party and its principles and stuff like that, so that they can, on the ground, take whatever action that needs to be taken without having to go to the party necessarily. Um, but how can they make such a call if they don't have some sort of understanding of the organizational structure at any given time? So I don't see how this could be private, secure information that is hidden from prying eyes. The people in positions, absolutely, those need to be hidden. But no military has like the positions in the military and the military structure hidden. That, that needs to be public knowledge for all sorts of endless reasons. Anyway, continuing. The leadership were mistaken in abandoning Parliament and participating in the first meetings of the Aventine, when they should have remained in Parliament, launched a political attack on the government, and immediately taken up a position opposed to the moral and constitutional prejudices of the Aventine, which would have turned the outcome of the crisis in fascism's favor. This wouldn't have prevented the communists from making the decision to abandon Parliament, and would have allowed them to do so whilst keeping their specific identity intact, allowing them to leave at only appropriate time, that is, when the situation was ripe to call on by the masses to take direct action. It was one of the crucial moments which affect how future situations will turn out. The error was therefore a fundamental one, a decisive test of the leadership's capabilities, and had led to a highly unfavorable utilization by the working class both of the weakening of fascism and the resounding failure of the Aventine. The return to Parliament in November 1924 and the statement issued by Raposi were beneficial, as the wave of proletarian consensus showed, but they came too late. The leadership wavered for a long time, and only finally made a decision under the pressure from the party and the left. The preparation of the party was made on the basis of dreary directives and a fantastically erroneous assessment of the situation's latent possibilities. Report by Gramsci to the Central Committee, August 1924. The preparation of the masses, which lent towards supporting the Aventine rather than wishing for its collapse, was in any case made worse when the party proposed to the opposition parties that they set up their own anti-parliament. This tactic, in any case, conflicted with the decisions of the International, which never envisaged proposals being made to parties which were clearly bourgeois. Worse still, it lay totally outside the domain of communist principles and tactics and outside the Marxist conception of history. Any possible explanation that the leadership might have had for this tactic aside, any explanation which is doomed to have very limited repercussions anyway, there is no doubt that presented the masses with an illusory anti-state, opposed to and warring against the traditional state apparatus, whilst in the historical perspective of our program, there is no basis for an anti-state other than the representation of one productive class, namely the Soviet. To call for an anti-parliament, relying in the country on the support of the workers' and peasants' committees, meant entrusting the leadership of the proletariat to representative groups that are socially capitalists, like Amendola, Agnelli, Albertini, etc. We're missing some information. We probably need to read that report by Gramsci to the Central Committee in August 1924. I don't know particularly what it means to have an anti-parliament. I think that they're saying that this is a time that they should have engaged in the electoral process. Whereas before it was less advantageous. At this point it was, but then Gramsci's group went in and and called for that, which put the proletariat on poor grounds. Um, because they were focusing on defeating fascism rather than the bourgeoisie. Though I would argue that defeating fascism is one part of defeating the bourgeoisie. Um, I don't know. I don't know enough about the history and the situation here. They are saying that this is anti-Marxist in its goals and stuff. Who knows? Apparently they know, but I certainly don't 100 years later. Continuing. Besides the certainty that a situation won't arise, a situation which could only be described as a betrayal anyway, just putting it forward in the first place as a point of view derived from a communist proposal involves a betrayal of principles and a weakening of the revolutionary preparation of the proletariat. Other aspects of the work of leadership also lend themselves to criticism. There has been a welter of watchwords that correspond neither to any genuine possibility of realization nor to any visible signs of agitation outside the party machine. The core demand for worker and peasants' committees, justified in a confusing and contradictory way, has been neither understood nor abided by. Part 7. The party's trade union activity. During the March 1925 metal workers' strike, another serious mistake was made. The leadership should have predicted that the proletariat's illusionment with the Aventine would propel it into class actions and a wave of strikes. If the leadership had foreseen this, it might have been possible to approach the FIOM, I'm guessing that's the metal workers, into a national strike, just as it had managed to get it to take part in the strike initiated by the fascists by setting up a metal workers agitation committee based on the local organizations, which throughout the country had been highly supportive of the strike. The stance the leadership had taken on the trade unions hasn't corresponded clearly with the watchword of trade union unification out inside the Confederation, a watchword that should still be adhered to despite the organizational decomposition of the latter. The party's directives on the unions have shown the evidence of Ordinovist errors as regards action in the factories. Not only has it created, or is it proposing to create, a multitude of conflicting organisms in the factories, but has frequently issued watchwords which depreciate trade unions and the idea of their necessity as organs of proletarian struggle. A consequence of this error was a paltry settlement with Fiat in turn, as there was a confusion surrounding the factory elections, where the criteria for choosing between classes or party lists of candidates, as on a trade union terrain, wasn't posed correctly. Part 8. Party activity in agrarian and national matters. It is quite correct to have issued the call for the formation of peasant defense associations, but this work has been conducted too exclusively from on high by a party bureau. Actually, this was an example of some degree of concreteness. Doesn't explain why they failed to come to this conclusion, but it gives an example of something wherein there's a failure of understanding the trade union activity, and a concrete example of that. Anyway, sorry, back to text. It is quite correct to have issued the call for the formation of peasant defense association, but this work has been conducted too exclusively from on high by a party bureau. Despite the situation's inherent difficulties, it is necessary to declare that viewing our task in this area in a bureaucratic way is dangerous. Indeed, the same goes for every other party activity. The correct relationship between peasant associations and workers' unions must be clearly established along the following lines. Whilst agricultural wage laborers must form a federation which adheres to the Confederation of Labor, a strict alliance must exist between the latter and the peasant defense associations at both the central and local levels. We don't have peasants, so can't talk on those ends. All regionalist and particularly Southernist conceptions, and there is already some evidence of this, must be avoided when dealing with the agrarian question. This is equally true with regards to demands for regional autonomy, which have been advanced by now certain new parties, who we must fight openly as reactionaries, instead of sitting around the table with them engaging in pointless negotiations. The tactic of seeking a line to the left wing of the Popular Party, Miglio, Miglioli, and the Peasants' Party has not given favorable results. We're going to take this. Well, I'm going to finish this up real quick. Once again, concessions have been made to politicians who are outside any classist tradition, without obtaining the expected shift in the masses this has, on the contrary, often disoriented parts of our organization. It is equally wrong to overestimate the significance of maneuvers amongst the peasantry for hypothetical political campaign against the influence of the Vatican. The problem certainly exists, but won't be resolved adequately by such means. Okay. So all regional successionist positions within agrarianism should be rejected. Okay, back to the text. Part 9, the leadership's organizational work. There is no doubt that the work of reorganizing the party after the fascist storm has produced some excellent results. However, it has retained an overly technical character. Instead of ensuring centralization by means of a clear and uniform statutory norms applicable to every comrade and local committee, the attempt was made to enforce it solely by means of interventions by the central apparatus. It would have been a major step forward to have allowed the base organizations to return to electing their own committees, especially during periods when circumstances most favored it. Okay, we're going to add this. All right, so every local committee and individual comrade should be in line with the center through, quote, clear and uniform statutory norms, but that would be operating procedures, parameters, activities, etc. It should not be based on technical character through enforcements by interventions by the central apparatus. That should only be done when absolutely necessary, and local committees should have general autonomy, except in emergency. Especially during the periods when circumstances most favored it. Damn, would be just say emergencies or something like that, and maybe a little bit of information on what constitutes as that. I get it. You don't want to be too concrete about things because that would potentially make things confused. But it would make it so people. Okay, whatever. Continue. Regarding the increase, then the subsequent decrease in the party's membership, not to mention the departure of elements recruited during the Matteotti crisis who are leaving with the same facility as they arrived. It goes to show how matters such as these depend on changing circumstances rather than on any hypothetical advantages that a general change of direction might have had. The effect and advantages of the month-long campaign of recruitment have been exaggerated. As for organization on the level of the cell, evidently leadership must put into effect the Comintern's general resolutions, a matter we have already referred to elsewhere. However, it has been done in an irregular and uneven fashion involving a host of contradictions, and only after much pressure from the rank and file has a certain accommodation been reached. It would be better if the system of inter-regional secretaries was substituted with a corps of inspectors, thereby establishing direct links which were political rather than technical between the leadership and the traditional rank and file organizations of the party, that is, the provincial federations. The principal duty of the inspector should be to actively intervene when the fundamental party organization needs to be rebuilt, and then look after and assist until normal functioning is established. None of this is outside of cybernetics at all. Quite the opposite. This is all stuff that's talked about ad nauseum. Okay, I'll take that. Okay, so the establishment of inspectors, which ensure direct political links between regions' leadership and traditional rank and file organizations of the party, probably summarize that poorly. But in short, these inspectors intervene when they see that the local fundamental organization is no longer viable and help restore viability. Back to text. Part 10. The leadership and the question of fractionism. The campaign, which culminated in the preparations for our Third Congress, was deliberately launched after the Fifth World Congress, not as a work of propaganda and elaboration of the directives of the International throughout the party, with the aim of creating a really collective and advanced consciousness, but as an agitation aiming to get comrades to renounce their adherence to the opinions of the left as quickly as possible and with minimum effort. No thought was given to whether this would be useful or damaging to the party with regard to its effectiveness towards the external enemy. The only objective was to obtain the internal objective by any means. We have spoken elsewhere from a historical and theoretical perspective about the delusion of repressing fractionism from above. The Fifth Congress, in the case of Italy, accepted that the left were refraining from working as an opposition, although still participating in all aspects of party work, accepted the political leadership, and it therefore agreed that pressure on them from above should be stopped. This agreement was, however, broken by leadership in a campaign which consisted not of ideological postulates and tactics, but of disciplinary accusations towards individual comrades who were brought before federal congresses and focused on in a one-sided way. This is useful. All right, so stopping fractionalism from above is not generally helpful outside of emergencies, and the reason why I say that is because this is a perfect example of an organization which loses viability, right? And so you have the system two, these external agents that come in, and they bring it back within the requirements of existing within the organization. This is entirely from up above, insofar as an above exists. So there are circumstances wherein stopping it from below is, or stopping it from above, is in fact possible, and it's useful, and it's something to pursue. You don't want to always do it. In fact, if you are, then you are clearly losing viability. Like a slave master can absolutely repress the activities of their slave through violent force, but that requires lots and lots of effort and attention. It's better if the autonomous agent just does what's required at any given time according to the best of their ability. That's generally the better way to go about it. But if it loses that, then you have to talk about what to do in response to that. And that involves organizational structure. That's one of those things. Then in addition, campaigns against fractionism should be in terms of ideological postulates and tactics in a dialogue. That would be the ideal circumstances, yes. Continuing. On the announcement of the Congress, an Entente Committee was spontaneously constituted with the aim of preventing individuals and groups from reacting by leaving the party, in order to channel the action of all the left comrades into a common and responsible line within the strict limits of discipline, with the proviso that the rights of all comrades to be involved in the party consultations was guaranteed. This action was seized upon by leadership, who launched a campaign which portrayed the comrades of the left as fractionists and secessionists. Whoever has done this translation is a bastard. I just want to say that. Whose right to defend themselves was withdrawn and against whom votes were obtained from the federal committees by exerting pressure from above. I would have thought that these guys would have liked to have kicked out all the people who didn't organically centrally agree with them on matters of common thing. Let's see. Okay, sorry. That's not important for our stuff. This campaign continued with a fractionist revision of the party apparatus and of the local cadres. Through the way in which written contributions to discussion were presented and by the refusal to allow representatives of the left to participate in federal congresses. Crowning it all, there was an unheard of system of automatically attributing the votes of all those absent from the conference to the theses of the leadership. Whatever the effect of such measures may be in terms of producing a simple numerical majority, in fact, rather than enhancing the ideological consciousness of the party and its prestige among some masses, they have damaged it. If the worst consequences have been avoided, this is due to the moderation of the comrades of the left, who put up with such a hammering not because they believed it to be in the least bit justified, but solely because they are devoted to the party cause. Part 11. Draft Program of Party Work. From the premises from which, in the left's view, the general and particular duties of the party should spring, are defined in the preceding theses. It is evident, however, that the question can only be tackled on the basis of international decisions. The left can therefore only outline a draft program of action as a proposal to the International about how the tasks of its Italian section might best be realized. The party must prepare the proletariat for the survival of its classist activity and for the struggle against fascism by drawing on the harsh experiences of recent times. At the same time, we need to disenchant the proletariat of the notion that there's anything to be gained from a change in bourgeois politics, that any help will be forthcoming from the urban middle classes. The experiences of the liberal democratic period can be used to prevent the reemergence of these pacifistic illusions. We already addressed that up above. The party will address no proposals for joint actions to the parties of the anti fascist opposition. Neither will engage in politics aimed at detaching a left wing from this opposition, and nor will attempt to push so called left wing parties, quote, further to the left. You know, I understand why they're blamed for everything that went down now. I understand why they were called um, uh, uh, said to be in support of fascists. I understand that now. I mean, you can, you know, there's an example, which I think is viable. If you're sitting at a table with, if you're sitting at a table with one Nazi who is talking and everybody else is silent and whatnot, you're not sitting at a table with one Nazi, you're sitting at a table with 11 Nazis, right? Because if you're not standing up and actively getting on their case about it, what are you doing? So they're saying that they're going to reject any actual attack. They're rejecting alignment. Yeah, this is. I don't know what it is that they're going to do out of this. They say that this is going to get the proletariat to realize that, oh, we can't align with reformism to defeat fascism because fascism and reformism are kind of, they're on the same team. Yeah, you push that, but that doesn't mean that you don't, you know, organize actively to attack um the fucking fascists. Okay, anyway, in order to mobilize the masses around its program, the party will subscribe to the tactic of the United Front from below. Will keep an attentive eye on the economic situation in order to formulate immediate demands. The party will refrain from advocating as a central political demand the accession of a government that concedes guarantees of liberty. It will not put forward, quote, liberty for all as an objective of class conquest, but will emphasize, on the contrary, that freedom for the workers will entail infringing on the liberties of the exploiters and the bourgeoisie. Um, yeah, so they're saying by word of mouth, our anti fascist position will be known. even though we're not going to make any official organizational outreaches to anti-fascist organizations. I don't think that works. In fact, I know that doesn't work. Continuing. Faced today with the grave problem of a weakening of the class unions and other immediate organs of the proletariat, the party will call for the defense of the traditional red unions for the necessity of their rebirth. In its work in the factories, it will avoid creating organs if they tend to undermine the rebuilding of the trade unions. Taking the present situation into account, the party will work towards getting the unions to operate within the framework of union factory sections, which represents a strong union tradition, are the appropriate bodies for leading workers' struggles insofar as today is precisely in the factories where the opportunities for struggle exist. We will attempt to get the illegal internal commissions elected through the union factory section, with the reservation that, as soon as it is possible, it is at present, and committees be elected by assembly of the factory personnel. As regards the question of organization in the countryside, reference can be made to what we have said regarding the agrarian situation. And this is a quotation. Well, no, I see that right. Once all the possibilities for proletarian groups to organize have been utilized in maximum, we may resort to watchword workers and peasants committees, observing the following criteria. A. The watchword of constituting workers and peasants committees must not be launched in a casual and intermittent way, but set forth in an energetic campaign when a changing situation has made a need for a new framework clear to masses. That is, when the watchword can be identified not just as a call to organize, but as a definite call to action. B. The nucleus of the committee will have to be constituted by representatives of the traditional mass organizations, such as the unions and the analogous organisms, despite these having been mutilated by reaction. It must not include convocations of political delegates. C. At a later date, we'll be able to call on the committees to have elections, but we will have to clarify beforehand that these are not Soviets, i.e., organs of proletarian government, but expressions of a local and national alliance of all the exploited for their joint defense. Is this applicable in our circumstances? Be launching. Yes, I think so. We're not going to summarize that quite yet. Regarding relations with fascist unions, inasmuch as today the latter don't represent themselves even in a formal sense as voluntary associations of the masses, there must be an overall rejection of the call to penetrate these unions in order to break them up. The watchword of the rebuilding of the Red Unions must be issued in conjunction with the denunciation of the fascist unions. The organizational measures that should be adopted inside the party have been indicated in part. Under present conditions, it is necessary to coordinate such measures with requirements that we can't go into here, clandestiny. It is nevertheless an urgent necessity that they are systematized and formulated as clear statutory norms binding all in order to avoid confusing healthy centralism with blind obedience to arbitrary and conflicting instructions, a method which puts genuine party unity in jeopardy. Wow. Okay. They recognize it. Systematized and formulated as clear statutory norms. That would be parameters and all that stuff. Uniform parameters, operating procedures, methods, and practices. They said it straight out that they need to do this. They actually admitted it. They called me a liberal for talking about this stuff and saying that, hey, listen, organizations, have structures and they need to be studied, and there are uniform and statutory norms. I didn't use that word. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe it's because I just didn't use the word choice that they wanted. um, anyway, all right. So, organizational measures within the party must be systematized and formulated as uniform parameters, operating procedures, methods, and practices which are universally binding in the organization. This is to avoid blind obedience to arbitrary and conflicting instructions from lack of clarity in the organizational structure of the party. Thank you. Thank you for saying the stuff that I keep saying and then calling me a liberal afterwards. Continuing. Part 12 on the party's internal situation. The internal political and organizational problems which our party faces cannot be resolved in a definitive way within the national framework, as the solution depends on the working out of the internal situation and on the politics of the international as a whole. It would be a serious and shameful mistake if the national and international leaders continue to deploy the stupid method of exerting pressure from above against the left, and the reduction of complex problems of party politics and ideology to cases of personal conduct. Since the left is going to stick to its opinions, these comrades who have no intention of renouncing them should be allowed, in an atmosphere free of scheming and mutual recriminations, to carry out loyal commitment they have given, that is, to abide by the decisions of the party organs and to renounce all oppositional work, whilst being exempted from the requirement of participating in the leadership. Evidently, this proposal shows that the situation is far from perfect, but it would be dangerous to delude the party that these internal difficulties can be eliminated simply by applying mechanical measures to organizational problems, or by taking up personal positions. To spread such illusions would be tantamount to making a severe attack on the party. Only by abandoning this small-minded approach, appreciating the true magnitude of the problem, and placing it before the party and the international, will we achieve the aim of avoiding poisoning the party atmosphere and move on to tackle the difficulties which the party is called on to face today. And that is the whole of the text of the draft theses presented by the left at the Third Congress of the at Lyon in 1926. I'll add this. So, okay, within the party, there should be open discussion of positions without recrimination. Members should be able to carry out actions without being kept from leadership positions, such as abiding by the decisions of party organs, renouncing oppositional work. The problem of internal fractionalism and scheming can't be dealt with solely through mechanical organizational formulations. But fractionalism also can be dealt with through the correct individuals in the correct positions. It must be done through the way we organize because, they're making a case for organic centralism, which supposedly stops fractionalism. This is an organizational methodology. It's an organizational structure and decision-making methodology within the organizational structure. So, so yeah. Anyway, that is the text, and it's the not particularly short one on the Communist Party of Italy's Third Congress Lyon theses presented by left. Next up will be the Third Communist International Sixth and Large Executive Report by left of Communist Party of Italy, and it's another lengthy one which will likely involve at least two, no, definitely at least two sessions, maybe three. With that said, though, we're not going to get started tonight. Thank you for coming, everybody, and have a great day.